Dr. Eliza Sampey, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you. Yeah, I'm glad we connected. We had to try only a couple times, but here we are.
Yeah, you had a grand adventure in Guatemala, and we both got sick, and it's flu season. So what are you gonna do?
I know. I'm still getting over being sick. I'm not cognitively 100% there, but you just have to carry the team today.
Oh, good. Well, no, then you and I can be on equal playing field because I'm not always cognitively there anyway because of
Perfect.
my concussions. So, did you bring a parasite home from Guatemala, or did you get like normal sick?
I did not bring a parasite home from Guatemala. I think my girlfriend's daughter got me sick. My daughter, it's hard to pinpoint the point of origin here because my daughter was sick. And I told my friend I was dodging the virus like Neo in the Matrix. Like I'm a major germaphobe and I'm wearing a mask inside and sanitizing everything.
Yeah.
And then I go on like a little 3-day weekend trip with my girlfriend and her daughter, and I get there and her daughter's sick. And so, I think I've just been dodging all the viruses, and one of them was a direct hit, but on the up and up now, I think, hopefully.
That's good. Yeah.
So, as a way to get to know you better, I introduced you as Dr. Eliza Sampey. This is usually an easy question for a lot of people, but it seems like you do so many things. What do you do for work? What do you do for a living?
Yeah, it's an easier question for me to answer now than it used to be when I did literally a million things. So I'm a doctor of physical therapy. I am a physical therapist and performance coach. I work with outdoor athletes, and I specialize in concussion rehabilitation and management in a very integrative way. I'm just getting used to saying this part. I am a former professional endurance athlete. That's a little new for me. And I specialized in backcountry multi-sport expeditions and self-supported bikepack racing. So a little more focused in one area than I used to be. But yeah, I used to do a lot of writing. I used to do a lot of public speaking, lots of different types of work as an athlete, in addition to running my PT and coaching business. So I wear less hats than I used to, but it does still feel like a lot.
For your professional athlete career, you do, like, I think you described yourself as a professional adventure athlete. So were you sponsored to be a specific type of athlete, or was it more of a broad, I'm an adventure athlete? Like, what was your professional athletic career? What did that look like?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess you could say that cycling / mountain biking was my main sport, and that I did have sponsors that supported me kind of year round for, mountain biking, bikepacking. But my main thing for most of my athletic career was multi-sport expedition projects. And so that was combining a lot of different things. And the way that I would work on sponsorship for those projects is I would come up with an idea for a long-term, expedition style trip, usually like weeks to months in duration. And I would plan her out, and then I would see how many, fun ways to traverse the landscape I could fit into that one route. And so usually like bikepacking and pack rafting, bikepacking and mountain running, ski mountaineering and pack rafting. Those were kind of my main things. And based on what I was going to do and kind of what was appropriate, I would solicit different sponsors throughout the outdoor industry.
Speaking of cats, there's first cat appearance right there.
So different sponsors in the outdoor industry and also outside of the outdoor industry. It's really important to be creative when you're doing stuff like that. And so I would work with sponsors just for that project. And, I would have deliverables. They would support me financially and with products. And then I would do that project, and then it would be done. And then the sponsorships for that would be over. Some of them would continue on with me for some of my other projects. And then, like I said, it was more kind of bike industry sponsors that would continue with me all year when I would do my races and, kind of the more just the baseline stuff that I would do on the bike. But
Wow.
It was a lot of combination things, which is really fun for me, and I like the creative element of that type of work. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like in this space, for adventure athlete and even like ultra endurance cyclists, you have to be really creative. You have to have your fingers in a lot of different cookie jars to make it all work. It's not
Mhm.
as developed as like if you're a professional road cyclist or something like that, where,
Mhm.
yeah, you have like team sponsors and all that. What did you grow up in like a really adventurous family? Like you obviously live now a very adventurous life and have for quite some time, but what was your introduction to like figuring out like, hey, I really like this. I'm an adventurous person. And I want to do it all.
Yeah, I mean that did come really early. Both my parents were and are athletes. I grew up in Minnesota, and so everybody, well, I don't know about everybody, but everybody in my world skied, and it's Nordic
Okay.
skiing up there. And so my dad was and still is at age 70 a Nordic ski racer. He's raced the Birkebeiner, the American Birkebeiner, lots of times. He was always skiing and training, and my first memory, I say this all the time, but literally my first memory was riding on my dad's back as he was skate skiing in a backpack. And I remember looking down and I had little skis on as well. So I'd get to ski and then he'd carry me. I was probably 2 or something. And I'd, look down and see his skis, going on the track. And so, I kind of grew up with that athletic lifestyle in more of the adventure sports realm versus traditional sports like baseball, volleyball, the sports that most kids play in high school, things like that. And so yeah, I did grow up like that, and we were always riding bikes, and I grew up with horses, and so we were exploring the woods on our horses and on foot. My mom was a big runner, and everything that they did kind of gravitated towards like being outdoors, being in nature. And I'm the oldest of 4 kids, and so my brother, that's the closest in age to me, came along 4 years after me. And so, as a young person, my parents were
Four
always
kids in 4 years.
no, 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 no. There was 4 kids. Okay, so there was me, and then 4 years later came my brother.
Oh, okay. I
And then a year
misunderstood.
later came my sister, and then 3 years later came my baby brother. And so we're spread out by like 8 years.
All right. All right. Yeah.
So
I thought they
so
were
yeah,
really
we were,
busy.
yeah, right. No, that would have been a lot of kids. I already feel bad for my mom raising 4, but 4 in a short amount of time would have been a lot. But yeah, I mean, we grew up on a farm in Minnesota, hobby farm, not a working farm. My dad was an engineer. But we lived in the woods, and so we were always exploring, and pretty early on, I had that adventurous spirit. My parents tell a story of when I was 2 or 3, and I was skiing around our yard, and it was like -40, Minnesota. I was like skiing in the snow, and I didn't want to come in, and I was like getting frostbite, and I was like screaming and crying because my mom like picked me up and brought me in the house, but I wanted to keep skiing, and so that was kind of how I think I just have that in my blood. Um,
Yeah. Was there a time when you were like when you realized that you could do it for a living? And was there like a specific sport that was like your gateway into becoming a professional athlete?
yeah, well, I guess those two things kind of happened in reverse. Like my gateway sport was really backcountry skiing. And starting with Nordic skiing as a young person, but I moved to Colorado when I was 17. I graduated high school early, moved to Colorado, and really quickly learned how to backcountry ski, took avalanche courses, and kind of, glommed myself onto the instructors of this avalanche course I took like right after I turned 18. And they taught me about the backcountry. And pretty quickly I started doing like huge, huge days in the backcountry on skis. And I loved that sport and still do because, with skis, you don't need trails, right? You choose your own route and all you have to do is avoid avalanches. I say all you have to do, but, you're not just like stuck to the trails. And so that's kind of how I got started on it. And then in my early 20s, I think I was in college, maybe grad school. It was like late college, early grad school. My friend Andy taught me how to build and sleep in a snow cave. And that just blew my mind. Like that opened up a whole world because then I didn't have to go home at night. I could like ski and then I could build a snow cave and sleep in it and then ski some more and build a snow cave and sleep in it. And so like that's really how I got my start in kind of the more like expedition style travel. And to me, that was the ultimate freedom, like not having to go home, like having everything that I needed to just stay out there and then go. And, I had a couple friends that I did that with, but I also did a lot of it solo. which was really cool and, pretty confidence building as a kind of young 20 something female. Not a lot of other young 20 something females were doing that, that I knew of. I'm sure there were, but I didn't
Yeah.
know any. And then with cycling, I started mountain biking pretty seriously when I was about 15. And by seriously, I don't mean like I was this, badass racer. Like seriously, I just got really into it. I loved it. I wanted to ride, whenever I couldn't ski. And in college, I met this group of guys. I went to Colorado State University in Fort Collins, and I met this group of guys that were mountain bikers. And so I would ride with them all week. And on the weekends, they would go off to races. And it didn't even occur to me that like I could do that too. Like women just like I didn't know of any other girls that were racing. And so I'd be like, bye guys, see you next week, and they'd go off to race on the weekends. And it wasn't until grad school. So let's see, 2005, 2006 era, that I decided I should try bike racing. And a friend of mine in my grad program was into road bike racing at that time. And she got me into it. And so I started racing road bikes. I didn't even ride road bikes at the time. I literally bought a bike and like started racing the next day. I didn't know what I was doing at all. But I fell in love and like the competitive environment was so much fun. I did compete in running when I was in high school and but it was just so different. And I really excelled in that. Like my body type is not like long and lean your typical like runner. I have these like short, powerful legs. And so, I raced criterium and I was a sprinter and I did really well and fell in love with it. And it was maybe my second year of road racing when I met Allison Powers. Do you know who she is?
I don't. It doesn't sound familiar.
Yeah, so she's retired now, but at the time, this was, early 2000s, mid 2000s. She was a professional road racer, and she's the only woman to ever have won the national time trial, criterium, and road race championships all in the same year. She was just, she raced over in Europe. She was just this incredible, like big, like powerful, like she was like Athena to me, this like, she's like 5'10", just this powerful, amazing, like female athlete. And I met her at a free like women's road bike handling clinic that she and a couple like other local pro road racers put on. And she, came up to me at the end and she's like, hey, like, you're really aggressive. You're really fast. Like, you seem to have a lot of potential. Like, have you ever thought about being coached? And I was like, no, I just do this for fun. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. And she's like, all right, well, if you ever want to think about coaching, like, here's my number, like, keep in touch.
And
like,
how old were you at that time?
23, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I was like, oh, wow, this like person that I like have heard about and read about, like thinks I'm cool, and
sees potential in you. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah. And so, I kept in touch with her and she kind of just like mentored me a little bit. And then the end of that year, I won my first like bigger, like Colorado road race. And I was like, okay, like maybe I could do something with this. And so I called up Allison and I was like, hey, I think I'm ready for some coaching. And so she worked with me for 7 years as a coach and she became one of my first sponsors. Actually, I was married at the time. And my now ex-husband was not a fan of me racing bikes at all and did not didn't allow me to like hire a coach, like didn't allow me to like buy a nice bike. Like when I started racing mountain bikes, he had me racing his bike, which is 2 sizes too big for me. So that was not a very supportive, environment for like a young kind of like wanna be, pro bike racer. And so Allison sponsored me. She's like, I see your potential. I want to work with you. Like, I know that you're not able to pay for this and I believe in you. And that was so huge for me at 23.
Wow. Yeah.
So yeah, she coached me for 7 years and that was really a huge, I mean, I wouldn't have done any of this without her. So very, very grateful.
Did you get your start in competitive like road racing or were you doing all different disciplines of cycling?
Yeah, road racing was first. And, that was kind of my initial like desire was to become a pro road racer. And so I focused really hard on road racing for the first couple of years. And I, worked my way up, you start at Cat 4, Cat 3, Cat 2, worked my way up to racing in like the elite field. And I think two things kind of happened at that time. This was around like 2011. 2010, 2011, I had a few good friends killed in training crashes, like bike car,
Yeah.
and I started getting pretty paranoid. Like I'd be out on a training ride and, I'd hear a car coming behind me and I'd be like looking behind me, like, are they watching me? Do they see me? Are they texting? Like, I was just getting really paranoid. And I actually made myself crash one time because I was looking behind myself, and I like
Yeah.
fell in the ditch. And so that was kind of part of it. And also I missed mountain biking as much as I used to. Like I'd been riding for almost 10 years at that point and loved it and kind of, I didn't do it a whole lot when I was so focused on road. And so in 2011, I asked Allison, like, hey, like, I know we've been on this kind of road racer track. Like, do you think I could also race mountain bikes? And she's like, well, of course you can. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I entered my first mountain bike race in the sport class. It was at Winter Park, Colorado, and I won it. And I won it because I was fast, not because I was good technically. I could like ride really fast, and then on the technical stuff, I was just not, like the greatest. And so I started working really hard on my technical skills, and still working with Allison, and I kept racing mountain bikes and road bikes. And then I turned pro in mountain bike in 2012 and pretty much left road racing behind at that point.
At that time, was there a lot of crossover between people that were racing road going over to mountain biking as well? Or was that a unique thing to come from road into mountain biking? Like, I'm wondering, did you just have so much better cardio than what the mountain bikers were used to seeing whenever you came over to mountain biking?
I had a lot of cardio. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think there was a lot of crossover, at least not at that time in Colorado. And it was kind of sad because all my friends were in road racing, and I don't know, there's a stereotype of road bikers that they're all like snooty and pretentious. And I'm sure some of them are, but I had the best friends in road biking. Like they were awesome. And, we'd see each other at all the races and we'd like try to kill each other when we're out there. And then we'd like drink beer together afterwards. And so I missed my friends, and a couple of them mountain biked. I don't think any of them really raced. But yeah, there wasn't too much crossover. And actually one of the fun things was after I'd been racing mountain bikes for a year or so and hadn't raced too much road, I came back and I raced the Colorado State Road Championships in Salida, and I won. And the reason I won is because I'm a mountain biker, 100%. There were some like handling things that I was definitely a lot more proficient in than some of the other athletes that were faster than I was. And so that was pretty cool, to like see the crossover kind of benefiting me in both places. So.
Did it surprise you that you were so good at cycling? I mean, you're winning all these events that you're entering for the first time, the first mountain bike race, like you're winning it. Are you surprising yourself? Because it doesn't sound like you didn't grow up saying, oh, I want to be a professional cyclist. I want to be a professional athlete. You're just having a good time. Yeah. And then you're like finding out in real time, you're like, oh, I guess I'm good at this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was shocked. I had no idea. Like, I mean, when I won my first road bike race, I was like, how did that just happen? Like, there's a photo of me crossing the finish line. It was a sprint to the finish. And there's a photo of me crossing the finish line. And I'm like, I'm not going like this. I'm literally like putting my arms up for the listeners. I'm literally looking behind me at the woman that I just out sprinted. And I remember that so clearly. I was like, how the hell did that just happen?
Yeah, you were just confused. You were like, are you sure?
Yeah, right. Totally. And I wasn't a great athlete growing up. I was kind of a mediocre athlete. Like, I loved competing as a runner, like track and cross country, but I wasn't great. I was pretty mediocre. And I just, it was very surprising.
Do you either know intuitively or because your coach was helping you identify like what it was about you that made you so good at being competitive in these races? Like, were you outworking everybody? Did you have natural talent?
I definitely have natural talent. I mean, at the time, I think I was really aggressive. And that, when you're coming up through the ranks as a road racer and like cat 4, cat 3, like a lot of women, at least at that time, weren't that aggressive. There were definitely some that were, and I was definitely one of them. And so, I think I was more willing to take chances at that time when I was in my 20s, early mid 20s. And, I would make holes that didn't exist in the pack, and I would like attack, and I would hunt people. Like I'm definitely, and I'm still this way. Like, I'm very I'm competitive when I'm racing. When I'm not racing, I'm not competitive at all. I could give two shits less. But like I would hunt people and I would study the competition and be like, oh, I know that this is this person's weakness and this is their strength. And so I think I like and what Allison told me, like she always told me that I had the mindset of a pro athlete. She's like, your head is so strong and, you can train and you can learn. And, because I didn't know anything when she first like got to me, but she's like, your mindset is really strong. And so the other stuff is a lot easier to train than, training your mindset. And you can train your mindset, but I kind of had that in the beginning. And so yeah.
That's an interesting question that I've asked a million people before, but I think it's worth asking probably a million more times, especially from someone like you who has, you have your coaching, you have experience, you have degree, you're educated on top of being an athlete, I guess is the point that I'm making. If you had to say like physical versus mental, like what's more important specifically, like in endurance cycling, bike pack racing, which one is more important if you had to assign like a value to each one of those?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've definitely heard that one before, discussed a lot. It's a good discussion, right? I mean, both are important. Like if you don't have the fitness physically, especially in ultra endurance, you're probably not going to do too well. And you're probably not going to have a lot of fun because you're probably going to suffer. And so, I think the physical has to be there, but the mental is what's going to get you across the finish line. And if you want to be competitive, you have to have the mental piece dialed. You really have to. And, I've seen so many good athletes and, I've been coaching since 2013, I think. And I've seen a lot of really, really, really talented athletes just crush themselves mentally. And, it's tough to see that. And so that's something that I do work a lot with, or a lot on with the people that I coach. So, you got to have the physical to be able to do the thing, but in order to finish the thing and in order to like have fun and keep yourself going and just be in a good headspace to both enjoy it and do it safely and smartly, if smartly is a word,
It is now.
With the ultra endurance stuff, you really got to be smart, and you have to have your head on straight in order to do that. So I think, they're both important, but without the mental piece, without the physical piece, you're going to get yourself a ways. Somebody who's really mentally strong and not physically fit at all. You can, especially on, like a longer bike packing trip, you can train yourself into shape as you ride. It's going to be painful and you're going to suffer. But if you don't have the mental abilities, you're not even probably going to get to the start line. So I always congratulate at my races that I host. I always congratulate people just to get to the start line because I always say there's so many people who will stop themselves for a variety of reasons before they even have the courage to even get to the start line to try something hard. And sometimes I feel like is the hardest part is just convincing yourself that you're tough enough, strong enough, capable enough, whatever it is, to get to the start line and try something that you're unsure of, right? Most people don't show up to ultras with 100% confidence that they're going to finish because there's a variety of things that could go wrong, right? So there's a lot of unknowns and that's scary. And so, I think that's huge is just getting to the start line is a big one. And should be commended, I think, for trying to do hard things. A fun question I wanted to ask you about, because I'm from Texas and this is way outside of my whole world. Is what did you call it? You made an ice cabin, an ice lodge, a snow cave. I kind of think I know what a snow cave is. I think you just dig a hole in the snow and you sleep inside of it. But kind of effectively. Yeah. What is a snow cave? Yeah. And how freaking cold is it to actually sleep in a snow cave overnight? It's warm, actually. It's warm. It's amazing. So effectively, how you dig a snow cave is you want to dig yourself a tunnel that's not too big because you don't want your body heat is what warms up the snow cave. You don't want it to leak out. And so you make a body-sized hole and you want to tunnel like down and then up, right? Because heat rises. And so you want to go down and then up, and then you basically make like a platform. So your snow cave will kind of look like a T, right? You've got like the tunnel that you go in, and then the platform that you sleep on, and you just dig out, a big enough platform for your baby sack to go, and if you're with someone, your buddy's baby sack, and then you basically just start like hollowing out all sides until you have this kind of like igloo shaped structure. And you want to make sure that there's enough snow. Like you want to dig it into a drift effectively. That's the ideal, is to dig it into a big, huge snow wind drift. And so the top is really compacted and you can dig into there. And then you want to poke like a ski pole through the top so you have a little bit of ventilation, especially if you're going to be cooking in there. And then you kind of like smooth out the sides, because if it's all rough, like that's condensation will come on those things and like drip on top of you. So you smooth out the sides. And so you have this nice little snow cave, and then you just like crawl in and out. And in there, it's pretty warm. And I've never actually gotten cold snow cave camping. I get way colder in a tent. And so if possible, I prefer snow cave. And so then you can cook in there, and it's very quiet. Like I remember one night, this might have been my first or second, one of my early snow caves. I was with my friend Andy, who taught me, and then our friend Sabrina. And we were up in the Holy Cross Wilderness in Colorado, snow cave camping. And when we went into bed, it was like a calm, clear night. And I woke up maybe 2 a.m. I had to pee. And so I crawled out of the snow cave, and it was howling. It was like raging blizzard, like howling, like blowing a hoolie, as they say in Scotland. And I had no idea, in the snow cave, it was just calm and quiet. And so I was like, oh, wow, and I go pee, crawl back in, go back to sleep. And then in the morning, we had like 2 feet of fresh powder. So yeah, that's
from the perspective of someone with claustrophobia, it sounds like a nightmare. How safe are those? Like, are they prone to collapsing on you while you're sleeping, or is it pretty safe?
No. Yeah, I mean, if you know how to do it, and yeah, you want to, like I said, like a big snowdrift, ideally that's like wind drifted, and so it's nice and compact on the top, and like they're not super prone to collapsing. And I mean, even if one did, I mean, if you have a big, thick, like feet of snow on top of you, like that is not going to collapse on you with your little cave, And if you just have like a small, I've had snow caves where I maybe only have like a foot above me because the drift was kind of marginal, but that's really all I had, or it was getting dark or whatever. And, something like that could collapse on top of you, but that's fine. You're not going to die.
How long does it take to build one of those? It sounds like, a real huge undertaking.
It depends how big the cave is. I mean, 45 minutes, maybe, if you're just digging like a one-person cave. And,
you get warmed up.
Yeah, it depends how fast you dig too, right? So like you want to dig fast enough to keep you warm, but you don't want to dig fast enough that you sweat, because that's the last thing you want to do is like sweat and then crawl into a snow cave, right? So I kind of like the time it would take me to build one would depend on like my temperature regulation.
So you mentioned cooking. Can you light a fire, or would you just use a stove?
And I just use a stove. Yeah, I think if you lit a fire, you probably melt a lot of your snow cave, or like fumigate yourself. And so I just use a little stove, and then poke a ski pole through the top for a little bit of vent, and then your cave door is ventilation. So yeah,
sounds wild. Sounds like a fun experience.
It's
Might
super
have to put
fun.
that on my bucket list.
I haven't done that for quite a long time, but that's definitely how I got my start in the kind of the multi-day adventure world, which is pretty random, but it's what it is.
All right. Well, the other component, I mean, professional athlete career, but also a professional career on the side. So this whole time that you were becoming a professional athlete, in tandem, it sounds like you were also getting an education. So what did you go to school for?
Yeah, so I did my undergrad as we all do, and then not all of us, but as anyone does that goes to grad school. So I got my undergrad, and that was actually in animal science. I initially wanted to be a vet, and then I switched over to human medicine after my junior year. And so my graduate degree was Doctor of Physical Therapy. So I did that in Colorado. I did that at University of Colorado in Denver. And that was definitely one of the hardest things I've ever done, which, a doctoral program, it definitely should be. And so, let's see, I graduated. I was there 2005 through 2008. And so graduated in 2008 and started my career as a PT, along my like newly developing career as a road bike racer at that time. And so at first I did traditional PT. I worked in a clinic. I got a, sports medicine job right out of grad school. And I was working mostly with young athletes. And then it was kind of random. It was like pediatric sports medicine. So like child athletes, and then also like older people, like older athletes in their like 70s, and that was really fun to kind of have that dichotomy of like this generation and then this generation, and so I really enjoyed that. And let's see, I think it was maybe 2 or 3 years in that my athlete career started to take off a little bit. And my boss at the time was really supportive of me and, basically gave me free reign to make my own schedule. And he was like, as long as you're getting your patients better and making them happy, like you can work whenever you want. And so, I would work like early in the morning and then later in the evening. And then I'd take like 3 hours off in the middle of the day to go train. And this was at the time I was living, I had gotten divorced. I was living in Nederland, Colorado, and I was working down in Boulder, like the outskirts of Boulder. And so, I would train on the roads outside Boulder. And then I worked 3 days a week, like pretty hardcore hours. And then 2 days a week, I would just be up in Nederland riding my bike and training. And so, then I would travel to races. That was mostly weekends at the time because I was racing road and then like XC mountain bike when I first started with that. And so, I got to kind of develop like my skills as a PT. He was also an amazing mentor. One of my other specialties as a PT is doing gait analysis for runners. And I 100% learned that from him. And he took me from someone that was barely able to run like 5 miles because I would get like knee pain and shin splints and everything to like I can run 40 miles. Like I don't know that I call myself an ultra runner, but I do some ultra running. And, he changed my life in that way. And so he taught me all of that. And so I was able to incorporate that. And then I moved to Crested Butte in 2013, something like, I think 2013. And, kind of the next evolution of like both my athlete career and my career as a PT. I was working at a sports med clinic there. And so in 2013, this was before that, I had started my coaching business. And yeah, it was kind of a hybrid at that time. It was like athletes would come to me who were training for like, bike or climbing or run or like ultra endurance hiking things, and they would get hurt. And usually their insurance-based PT would not take them as far as they wanted to go. And so I would work with them as kind of that bridging that gap between like their initial PT that they might get with their insurance company or potentially after a surgery to like return to sport. And I'm very performance oriented. And so I weave performance into my rehab plans, and I weave rehab into my performance plans. So it's very integrative like that. And that just kind of is the way that it started working for me to practice. And that's what I still do now. And so some of that in the beginning was hybrid, like in person and virtual. And then over time, it's evolved to become pretty much 100% virtual. Although I do still like to see people in person when I can, because it's fun to actually see a person. But, once I took that virtual, I was able to do that from the road when I started traveling more for racing and then expedition. And so in 2015, I left Crested Butte and moved into my van and went full time on the road. And, for a couple of years, I pretty much focused 100% on my athlete work, and I didn't do as much PT and coaching. And I missed it. Like I like using my brain in that way. It's really creative. I love working with people. I love like helping other athletes, like learn more about their bodies and learn how to connect their minds and their bodies and learn how to be healthy while they're doing these big things out in the mountains. And so I came back to that and have just kind of woven in my athlete career and my PT and coaching world ever since.
I wanted to ask you about your van. As a internet admirer of yours for a while, I've always coveted your Astro van. My family had an Astro van growing up, and I just think they're freaking badass. So you mentioned, I wasn't sure if you lived in your van full time or if you just used it for travel. But yeah, first of all, is your Astro van 4-wheel drive?
No, rear wheel.
And it's still
And
getting rowdy out there,
I've taken her a lot of places. I have chains. Chains have come in handy a lot of times.
huh?
Yeah.
So why did you decide to live in your Astro van?
Well, I was paying rent in Crested Butte and I was traveling so much at that point for bike stuff that it just didn't make sense anymore to pay rent. And the riding season in Crested Butte is pretty short. And at that time I was all in on bike racing. And so I just decided to move into a van. And I've lived in vehicles kind of throughout my life. 2003, I lived in New Zealand and I lived in a station wagon. When I was 17 and I moved to Colorado, I moved there the summer before I started college. And so I lived in my Pontiac Sunbird, like two-door hatchback.
I remember the Sunbirds.
Yeah, it was a great car. I don't know, it was great for living, but it worked for me at the time.
They were tiny. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, so I lived, and then, in my early racing career, when I travel, as I was traveling, I lived in my Jeep Cherokee, and so I knew that I always wanted to live in a van. I was obsessed with vans, like way before the van life movement was a thing. And so I just decided to go for it. And I decided to go with the Astro over a bigger van because I'm a small person. I'm like 5'2", barely. And I had a big dog, but I was like, it's just me and my dog. Like, we don't need something big. I'm going to be traveling a lot. Like, I want better gas mileage. And so I couldn't find anything in Colorado. And so I actually found this van in Portland and I bought it sight unseen. And I sold my car. I got rid of most of my stuff from my house in Crested Butte, and I took my dog and my bikes, my skis, and my climbing gear, and the few things I had, and I put it in a U-Haul van, and we drove across the country. And I just had no idea what I was gonna, what was waiting for me. I talked to this person. It was a small dealership, and I talked to the person for a long time and about the van. And so I got to it, and I didn't know. So I do a lot of my own car mechanic work now. I didn't at the time, so I didn't really know, but I was like, all right, well, I'm going to hope for the best. And I tore the seats out right there at the dealership. And I was like, here, you can have these. And I built it out a few times. My builds are pretty minimal. Like, I don't, you see these fancy, like, big Sprinter van builds and everything. And like, I never felt like I needed that. Like, my van to me was always like a place to sleep and a place to like cook and work when the weather was bad. But I prefer to be outside, And
Yeah.
so, like, in the years, I did live in the van full time for 6 years. I didn't have any kind of a home base.
Wow.
And so, I lived out on public lands, and I would spend most of my days like running or biking or, rock climbing or whatever I was doing, pack rafting, skiing, and so I just didn't really need to be like in my van all the time. And so, yeah, did that for 6 years full time. And it was great because when I would leave on international expedition trips, I could just park it, usually parked it at a friend's place that had land or, a big driveway or something. And then I would fly off to, Guatemala. I lived in Guatemala for a year. And my van was in Canada on some farm. And, took my dog, and we lived in Guatemala for a year. I based out of there. I was racing in South America. And then I went to Peru and left my van at a friend's place, and then it was in Pakistan, left my bike at a friend's place, or my van, and so it worked. I didn't have to pay rent. I was able to live on very little. I didn't really have many expenses, and so it allowed me to only work as much as I needed to. So I had my income from sponsorship, and then I also had my income from coaching and PT. And I mean, I think I ever only made, like, in those years, like maybe $35,000 a year. And that was more than enough. Like, I saved money during those years. And so I loved it. It was just a very like freedom lifestyle. And I'm just a kind of a minimalist person. I grew up in the woods. Like, I know how to like take care of myself in nature. Like, it just worked for me. And so, and then it was really fun. And then, I met my partner, my current partner. We've been together 5.5 years. And for the first 2 years of our relationship, I was still traveling quite a bit. And so I lived kind of part-time with him and part-time on the road. And then now my van, we split time now in the last few years between Tucson, Arizona, and a little town in Northwest Washington called Darrington. And we have, a couple years ago, we bought land in both places, which I think I think I haven't said that publicly yet. Like, we never actually announced. It was like, oh, this is this big thing that we need to announce, and then we just never did. And then I left social
Breaking
media for a
news.
year. We never did. Yeah. And and it was kind of wild how it happened that we ended up with like two pieces of land basically at the same time. But we're designing a little house, and we're building ourselves very slowly, like building out our properties. And so now we go back and forth between the two places, and we take like 4 to 6 weeks to make that transition. And so in between, like, we still both get to do our things on the road. My partner lived on the road for a while as well. And so, now it's a lot less van life than it used to be. But I mean, it was such a good time. Like, I'm so glad I had that in my life. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you miss it, or do you just find that that was good for that season of life, and now that what you're doing now is good for this season of life, or do you miss that nomadic lifestyle?
I mean, yes to both,
Yeah.
It's like, what is that? The story about the ghost ship that didn't carry you away, like, there's so many different paths you can take in life. And like, I don't wish that I was still doing that, because I love what I'm doing now and what I'm building with my partner. And, I spent like 8 years and longer. I mean, I traveled before I was a pro athlete too. I did a ton of traveling. And so I spent a lot of time traveling the world. And like, the reason that I was never able to settle down is because I fall in love with every place I go. Every place I go, I'm like, oh, it's here. This is it. I want to be here,
Yeah.
Go to the next place. Oh, this is amazing. I want to be here. But over the years that I lived in my van, like, I really found myself like gravitating towards like Northwest Washington, like the North Cascades, like the very like rainy, spongy place, and then the Sonoran Desert, which is the complete opposite of that. And, I'm a person of extremes and I love contrast. And so like that like spongy place and then this spiky place, like those became my places that I would travel between, and I'd see places, and I'd do other things too, but like those felt like home. And, when I thought about buying land on my own before I met my partner, I was like, gosh, which place do I choose? I can't choose. Like, I love it here and I love it here. And then when my partner and I got together and decided to kind of combine forces, like, he also had a dream to build his own house, and we're building it ourselves. We're building a straw bale house here in Tucson. And so we decided.
A straw bale house?
Yeah.
What is that?
It's what it sounds like. No, I mean, it's a house. It's an actual house, but you use straw bales for insulation. And there are some straw bale building designs that do use straw bales for load bearing walls. And so basically you build a frame of a house, and then you use the bales to make the walls. And so it's environmentally friendly. It's very well insulated, which, with a place like Tucson that gets hot in the summer, like, we don't spend summers here. We are up in Washington, but it's nice to have that insulation. And so, yeah, that's what it is.
That's wild. Do either of y'all have any experience building a house, or did you just, you're like, I've built out my Astro van a few times. I could build a house.
Yeah, no, Dan does. He helped some friends in Colorado. He was pretty instrumental in helping them build an off-grid house a couple of years ago. I guess, gosh, maybe 5 years ago now. Time flies. So he's got some building experience. I didn't have any, but I have a lot of car mechanic experience. When you live in your van and you are in the middle of nowhere and you have to replace some parts, like, you learn how to do it. And you can learn pretty much anything on YouTube. And so, I'm like, that was another thing that surprised me, is I actually am kind of mechanically inclined, and I never would have guessed that about myself. And so, he's been teaching me a lot about building, and, he is way more like, he's an engineer. Like, he's a lot better at like the design, the engineering, like the math component of all of that stuff than I am. And, I've got ideas, I'm creative, but like,
you're the muscle.
Yeah, exactly. He's the brains and I'm the brawn.
You're like, I got this, babe. Don't worry.
Yeah, that's funny. No, he's also the brawn, but yeah, it's going to be a fun project, and it's been fun. We built a couple outbuildings on both the properties so far, and nobody's chopped any hands off yet. And we're still together. We still love each other. So
yeah, that's a real challenge. Will you still love each other when you're done building the houses?
I know, it's funny. A lot of people are like, oh, you guys have been together like 5+ years. You're going to get married. And I joke like, oh, if we still like each other when we're done building a house, then maybe we'll get married.
Yeah, that's a real test. What a cool
Yeah.
thing though to build your own house. I was just talking to my girlfriend about that. Like that's like one of my ultimate dream fantasy ideas for a future version of myself is to just like literally build my own house. Like
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
I mean, I won't say no one does that. But it really like in America specifically, like no one's building their own house in America hardly.
Yeah. Yeah, for
In
sure.
Guatemala maybe.
I know. Well, yeah. And so I think that was actually one of my inspirations. Like when I lived in Guatemala and I saw these houses and I like literally witnessed people building their houses, I was like, oh, like I could do that, you know? And so, yeah, I mean, and
That's where
just
I got my
traveling all over the
inspiration too. I'm
world.
like, they just get their buddies together over the weekend, you know, a few weekends in a
Yeah.
row, and they're just like building houses, you know. And
Mhm.
I interviewed another guy that owns a surf school in Costa Rica. Falcon is his name.
Hmm.
And he would just fly into Costa Rica over the period of, I think, 6 years and just get some contractors when he was in town and build a house eventually, you know, while he was there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I
Hmm.
love that idea of just building your own house, man, making it your
Hmm.
own, literally making it your own.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been a really fun, cool process. And so, it's nice to have that like distraction from the fact that I can't adventure anymore because of the concussion stuff. And it's like, and it's also just, it's, I feel like it couldn't have come at a better time, like to have like gotten the land and land ownership is weird, right? Like you can't, I don't know, like it's in my mind, like you can't own a land, like you can't own a mountain. Like that shit has been there long before you came and it's going to be there long after you go, you know? And so like that's weird to me, but that's what we do. And so this is how we do. And so,
Yeah.
like ever since like getting those pieces of land, like I just have this desire to like be there and just observe it. And that is so cool. Like in Northwest Washington, there are like slugs and bugs and creatures. And like I will just sit there and watch like slugs crawl around for hours.
Yeah.
And,
I
it's just
can, oh, go
fascinating.
ahead. Yeah, I can relate to that. My family had 120 acres, and I spent an obscene amount of time out there, and just like being on the property. Like whenever you feel like it's yours, like you want to know every
Mhm.
pebble, every tree,
Yeah,
what the
yeah,
water does whenever it comes through the property when it rains.
exactly.
Like, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, it's special. And I think the thing with land is the same thing as money. It's just a piece of paper, and we all kind of agree that it has that value or that you own that thing, but it's just a construct that we've all just agreed that
Hmm.
that's how we're doing it. But yeah, you
Yeah.
own a piece of paper.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah. And with the land, it's like I feel this enormous privilege that I get to now like take care of this piece of land or these two pieces of land for the rest of my life, And I mean, we're planning to die in these houses, you know.
Yeah,
And I get to take care of it. I get to nurture it. It gets to nurture me. Like it gets to be this just like beautiful, like reciprocal relationship that like I've traveled a lot of places and I've, developed relationships with landscapes, but I'm always passing through, and like now I get the opportunity to actually like be there and not just pass through. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
yeah. And yeah, make it your own little special place.
Hmm. Yeah.
Whenever you think about adventure, like not as a professional athlete, but I mean, you do so many different things: mountaineering, pack rafting, running. I mean, cycling, right? Like you do a lot. What is there anything in particular that draws you when you think about like, I want to go on an adventure? Like, what criteria does it need to meet for you to be a trip that you want to do?
I think the biggest criteria is that it has to be unknown to me.
Mm,
Obviously, there's not an inch of this world that humans haven't explored, and so I don't think there's really any unknown exploration. But I think it has to be unknown to me. I don't do a lot of routes that other people have done. Not that I wouldn't, not that I'm like against that. That's just not what I am drawn to. Unless I'm racing, obviously, then I'm doing a route that someone's created.
yeah.
But for the adventure, the expedition stuff, like I want to feel like I'm an explorer. And so I create my own routes and I use a combination of like Gaia GPS and Google Earth. And I will just like pour over maps and satellite images and And so I'll kind of just get an idea, just like intuitively, of like an area of the world that I want to go, like Pakistan. That was random, right? Like who goes to Pakistan, but like, I was like, oh, that's like the Middle East, like that's interesting. So I start looking at maps and I look at satellites and like, oh, the Hindu Kush and the Karakoram and the Himalaya, they all come together in Pakistan, and there's these huge rivers and these huge mountains and so I get inspired by an area. And then I start drawing little lines like, oh, I could maybe connect these two places by bike. And then I could connect these two things by river. And then, oh, this is going to need to be on foot. And, or like, this landscape in the winter, like I look at topo maps a lot. I spend a lot of time looking at topo maps, especially for, ski traverses because you're not on trails. And so you got to look at topo maps and make sure you're not going to kill yourself in an avalanche, right? And so, looking a lot at topo maps, like, okay, this ridge line goes here. And I look a lot at slope angle maps as well. And so like, okay, this face looks like it's cliffed out, but oh, here's this little niche in between that maybe I could get through if I'm climbing that face, things like that. And so, the unknown is really the biggest kind of aspect for me. And then I just start looking at maps and landscapes and kind of see like what mode of travel would fit the landscape that I'm inspired by. And then I just start piecing those things together.
Wow. Are you friends with Jenny Tuff, or do you know who that is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are. We haven't met in person, but we've connected and communicated quite a bit.
Yeah.
When she went to Guatemala, I actually sent her a bunch of routes that I'd ridden, and that I'd like a bunch of lines that I'd drawn in Guatemala that I'd actually ridden, and so I'd sent those to her. I think we've known each other for a few years. Yeah, she's incredible.
I feel like y'all are cut from the same cloth. Whenever she's been on the podcast before, and the way she talks about planning an adventure is almost identical to yours. Like that's not the path that everybody's taken. Like she's looking at elevation profiles and maybe I could go up this way and maybe that'll work and maybe it won't and it doesn't and you got to go around this way.
Yeah, definitely.
The much more adventurous approach. Yeah, that's one of like the kind of, it's a pro and a con, but to it being a con, like the amount of information that we have out and available now, it's a lot, so it's great because it creates easier access. But I do really like the adventurous aspect of it, and so I try to walk a fine line of like doing research, but not doing so much research that it kind of spoils the adventure. Like you want to be surprised whenever you go, but oftentimes I'm following routes that are like more established than what you do. It sounds like.
Yeah, I've never followed an established route for a big trip. And usually things,
wow.
I never have. I make routes and then usually things like, you arrive like, so my teammate and I for Pakistan, like we arrived in Islamabad and we spent a week with a woman who's an adventure athlete. She's Pakistani. Summer Khan is her name. And so she and I had become friends just kind of online. And so we stayed with her and her family for a week. And, 2 days after we hit the ground, we had to change our intended route because Pakistan and India are throwing bombs at each other across the Kashmir border, where the northern border crossing is. And that's where we had intended to cross. And so, Summer's like, well, you can't go there anymore. They're bombing each other now. And we're like, okay, so then we have to pivot. And then, then we're looking at maps. But then once we're on the ground, we're also talking to locals, and so on that trip, she connected us with some friends of hers in a town called Chitral, which is kind of near the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. And Chitral wasn't even on my radar. And so, within days, we're changing the route. And then, you're looking at maps in real time, but then you're also talking to locals and you're talking to people. And, when I was in Peru, my teammate Brendan and I on that trip, like we had developed a route for kind of the first like week of the trip. And then we had kind of had this like, maybe we could go in this region and we'll see what happens type of attitude, And so we got to this town called Jimbe, which is in the Cordillera Negra of the Peruvian Andes. And we are literally we're standing in the town, we're talking to these locals and we're looking at this line going across a mountain. And we asked the guy, like, ¿Es posible que pasar con bici? Is it possible to pass with a bicycle? And he looks at our bikes and he looks at us and he's like, oh, yeah. Pasa con caballo. I can go with a horse. And so it's like, okay, well, if you can go with a horse, we can probably go with a bicycle. And, who knows how much we're going to be riding versus pushing. And so, with that, we followed that guy's direction. And we went there, and then, then we get to another village, and then we talk to more people. And I mean, we ended up seeing these amazing places in northern Peru in the Cordillera Negra and Cordillera Blanca that we never would have seen if we were following an established route, or even if we were just like committed and married to the route that we had drawn on the map initially, We ended up on this road, like not really a road, but this like track that we called El Camino Silencio, which is the silent road. And that's what we called that whole expedition. And it was just so incredible. And we ended up there because we followed a woman who was riding a horse, So yeah, it's so fun.
There's a saying that I like, adventure starts when your plan falls apart, something like that. That's when the real adventure starts, whenever you, have all kinds of adventures, whether it's seeing something you didn't expect to or meeting someone you didn't expect to. And that's kind of one of the beautiful things about traveling. And it's hard with someone like you who's done so much and gone to so many incredible places. But one of the places I wanted to talk to you about was Guatemala, since I just got back from Guatemala. And so you said that like you went there to do a bike race, and then wound up like living there for a year or something like that.
Yeah. So what happened? How did that happen? How did I get here? So there's a mountain bike stage race. It's actually going on right now. It's in March. It's called El Reto del Quetzal, the Challenge of the Quetzal. And it's a 5-day stage race. And so for people that don't know, a stage race is where you race a different route each day. And sometimes everything starts and leaves from the same spot, like in the Breck Epic, with a big race here in the US. And a lot of times the international ones, you're actually traveling through the country as you're racing. And so you start at one town, you end in another, then you start the next day at that town, you end in another, right? And so it's not like bike packing where you're sleeping on the trail. It's maybe semi-supported. A lot of them, you're carrying all your own stuff during the day, but then at night, you're either camped at like a base camp where they feed you, or you're like sleeping at a hotel where they feed you. And so this was a 5-day stage race in Guatemala. And I went down there when I lived in Crested Butte. I think it was 2015, March of 2015. And I was just blown away, like mind blown. I thought I was a good mountain biker. And then I went to Guatemala. And I was like, oh my God, like, a lot of the trails there just scared the shit out of me. They're steep. And like at that time of the year, it's not the rainy season. They have dry and rainy season. So it's dry. And so the trails were loose. And so,
they're also down there for their volcanoes. So lots of elevation.
Lots of elevation. Yeah. And, which I was used to from Colorado, but like, the terrain was just gnarly. And so I got used to that over the course of the days, but, that kind of blew me away. And then just the culture. I mean, you've been there, you've seen it. Like, it's so vibrant. Like I describe it as an explosion of color and light. And it's just, like the villages we traveled through, there's so much Mayan influence, and they're just very colorful people, like literally and in personality. And, and the people, the Guatemalans that I met in the race, like they all befriended me. And at the time, the race didn't have an open women's category. There was, duos. You could race as a woman in a duo, and then there was open men. And so I raced in open men. And so I was the only woman in the men's race. And everybody at first, like the first day was a time trial. And I think I finished like 12th or something like that. And there were like, I don't know, like 50 or 70 people or something. And then by the second day, I was in 6th in the men's race. And everyone's like, huh? Who is this like gringa, that's coming here and like finishing on the podium in a men's race? And so they were all curious and asking questions, and they were all super nice. And, some of them spoke just Spanish, and I spoke a little Spanish at the time. And then some spoke Spanish and English, and they were just so friendly. And like, we go to one town and somebody would be like, oh, my brother has a ceviche stand here. I want to take you to his ceviche stand. And so, they'd take me to the ceviche stand. And then the next town, one guy's like, oh, this is where my family lives. Let me introduce you to my wife and kids. And so we go to his house, and so they just really like took me in. And I was like, wow, these people are so friendly, and this country is so amazing. And so I came home from that race, and a bunch of things happened effectively. Like I went to Iceland for a film trip, which like basically like started my whole expedition career and motivated me to just jettison my entire life and change it. And so I moved to Guatemala after that trip. So I think, I went there in March, and then I moved there in like June or something. And I took my dog and my bike, and I rented a little casita in a town called Panajachel, which is right on Lake Atitlan. And it's kind of a great base to start from if you want to do a lot of mountain biking with a lot of climbing, because you have to climb 4,000 feet just to get out of town. And so your ride starts with a 4,000-foot climb, and then, you just explore the whole country. And so, during that year, like I rode with all of these Guatemalans all over the country, and those guys are gnarly, and that, like, they're so talented and they're so fast and they're so fit, and they can just go and go and go and go all day long for days on end, and they would like sandbag the shit out of me. They'd be like, okay, this ride's going to be like 4 hours, and I'd be like, okay. So, my little American like racer mindset and my little spandex, I'd be like, I'm going to bring this much water and this much food. And then 7 hours later, I'd be like, you guys, I need food. But, there's towns everywhere. And so you stop at a tienda and you buy some food. And so, I mean, that year really changed me. And like, I was kind of tough already, but that really toughened me up. Like just spending that much time with the Mayans, the Mayan people that I was riding with and that I was meeting and seeing. And my very first kind of like self-created expedition project was in Guatemala with my teammate Brendan, and he's a photographer. And so we pitched an article to Mountain Flyer magazine, and we had a feature article in the middle of that magazine, and he got the cover shot, me standing on a volcano with my bike. Wow. And that was amazing. I mean, we basically bike packed through the country between like 5 different volcanoes. That was also my first bike packing trip.
Really?
Yeah. So we would bike pack between the volcanoes, and we would then like climb the volcanoes with our bikes on our back, and then like ride down. Like basically it's like more skiing than riding, you're just like through the ash, through like the ash residue, I guess, the volcanic rock that's up there. And that was amazing. That was just... It's cool. I can't believe that was 10 years ago, 2015. That's wild.
That is crazy.
I was a different person. I was such a different person.
Y'all would bike to different volcanoes, put your bike on your back, carry it up to the top, and then just go down it for fun?
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard of anyone doing that before. I think that's a bikes for death first right there.
Yeah, it was so cool. And I mean, we had so many misadventures on that trip. Like, I mean, we got like deathly ill. We accidentally camped on a Mayan burial ground. We like got in big trouble and run off this, this burial ground by these angry Mayans in this town. I mean, understandably so. We were camped on their ancestors, and we were so sick. And this like pharmacist in this town like took us in and nursed us back to health. This was on the Guatemala-Mexican border. We were trying to climb Volcan Tacaña, which we didn't even get to because we were basically dying in this guy's apartment. And so... So, that happened. And then, it's just a gnarly country. Like the terrain is so steep and it's so rugged, and it's mountains, but it's also jungle, and it's just really challenging. And so, yeah, that was a really, really hard trip, but it was
Do you
have
a name for that sport? What do you call that? Bike mountaineering, bike pack mountaineering. Would you offload all the weight off your bikes before you would carry them all the way to the top? No,
because we would camp up there. Like we camped on the top of a volcano. It was so cool. Wow. So cool.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Wow. That'll make you tough.
Yeah. And like I'm 5'2" and 120 pounds, right? Like if I can do shit like this, like anybody can,
Yeah, that's amazing. Do you know Noelle Battle that runs Bikepacking Routes?
I don't. I know who she is, but I don't know her.
I was just on a call with her yesterday, and she just had known that I went to Guatemala, so she was asking about it. But she went to go visit Guatemala and wound up living there for 5 years. Oh, wow. And everyone you hear about that talks about Guatemala just has nothing but amazing things to say. I think we really messed up by not going to Lake Atitlan.
It's incredible.
It was like,
so beautiful.
Yeah, because that's where Noelle lived too. So you lived on Lake Atitlan, and so did Noelle. She lived on Lake Atitlan too.
Do you know what town she lived in? Was she in Pana? I'll have to ask her. You reach out to her. Yeah, I would have. I mean, I don't think I would have ever left. Like if I was at the time in my life where I was ready to settle down and actually live somewhere, I don't think I ever would have left. I loved it so much.
Why did you leave?
Well, the biggest reason, so I was a sponsored athlete. That was very much part of my job at the time. And I had a schedule in the US that next year, on the East Coast. And so I
Oh,
was racing
okay.
like Pisgah Stage Race, Transylvania Epic. I was also doing a lot of mountain bike skills coaching at the time. I was coaching for Ladies All Ride, and then I was doing my own coaching thing. And so, yeah, I had a schedule in the US. And so I, intended to do my racing schedule and then come back. And then the Peru thing came about, and I was like, ooh, a new place.
That's funny you mentioned Peru. I looked up Noelle's email. She didn't put in her email. She told me when we were talking. I don't remember what town she said, but I did look up that y'all missed each other by like 2 years. Y'all weren't living
Oh,
there at the
really?
same time because you had
Okay.
sent me when you lived there, and so I cross-referenced it. But y'all were there around a similar time.
Mhm.
Yeah, just interesting. I
Yeah.
want to go back and ride through it. I think
So cool.
ours was a little too touristy and not as adventurous as either of us like, which is our own fault. I think we had a like an armed robbery situation in El Salvador, and I think we subconsciously and unintentionally planned a less adventurous trip this time.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that makes sense. That's fair.
as a result. But anyway,
Yeah.
we're gonna get more adventurous next time.
Yeah. Well, if you go back down there, so my friend Brendan, who was my partner on both the Guatemala expedition and the Peru expedition, he still lives there. So he had moved down there a couple years before I had, and he and I met in that race. And he now owns a mountain bike guiding company called MTB Guatemala.
Oh yeah,
He's based in a town,
I saw it when
Mena.
we were looking. Yeah,
Cool.
I
Yeah.
looked up his website.
Yeah, yeah. So that's my buddy. That's the guy that I did the expeditions with. And he's crushing it. He's doing a great job. And he's really passionate about like paying his guides fair wages. And so he, hires all Guatemalan guides and pays them a living wage, which is kind of a big issue with a lot of gringos that go down to Guatemala to start businesses. Like they don't actually pay their guides a living wage, which is shitty, honestly. Like that shouldn't be
Yeah,
happening. And so, Brendan lived in Guatemala for like 5 or 6 years before starting his company. And he is friends with a lot of these people that were working for gringo owned companies and weren't getting paid well. And so when he started his company, he's like, I'm going to do this right. Like, I'm not going to be like the cheap guiding company where Americans come down and pay nothing to get guided. Like, we're not cheap because we're paying our guides a living wage. And he really believes in that. And he's just developed this awesome community and this awesome business, and he guides a lot of Guatemalans too. And so there's a lot of mountain biking as a sport has really exploded in Guatemala. And that was happening even when I was there 10 years ago, but even more so now. And so he and his guides that are all Guatemalan are showing their own country people their own country, and just exposing them to this whole world that like they live there and didn't even know existed. And so there's all these Guatemalans exploring by mountain bike now, and it's really cool. So definitely
that's
go look
awesome.
if you get back down there.
Yeah, mountain bike, Guatemala.
Yeah,
Plug them,
MPB
and anyone
Guatemala.
else who's going down there. Yeah.
Mhm.
A place that's like really really high on my personal bucket list is Peru.
Mhm.
I think our next trip is to Colombia, which is I'm also excited about this summer, which is close to Peru, so I'm getting closer.
Yeah.
Uh, but I was curious to hear about your trip to Peru, and I understand you like created a route in
Mhm.
Peru while you were down there.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, so that was the trip that we created it as we were going, right? And that I mean there's a lot of my expeditions like I would tell people like I don't know if you want to repeat this. You
Yeah,
know, maybe don't go where I went, maybe don't do this exact thing. But that
Yeah.
route
Use
turned out
my
to be
expedition of where not to go.
right, 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 and so but that trip turned out to be one that people like it would be really good to repeat, right? Like once, Brandon and I were really doing an exploratory thing when we did it, but the route that we pieced together is definitely something that could be repeated. And so it was, I don't know how many miles. One thing about me is I do not track my mileage. I do not track I have no idea how many miles I ride a year, how many feet I climb, like any of my expeditions. I have no idea of any of that stuff. But it took us, I think we were riding for like 40 days. And then we stopped a little bit to do some running. So like I love mountain running, and there were a couple times that we would make camp at like 15,000 feet and there'd be this like big ridge line. And so then, I would do some running around there. And then we stopped in a town called Yanama, and we did a bunch of just like exploration on our mountain bikes, like from Yanama. We dropped our gear at a little a homestay or whatever, and then explored around the area. And we did the same thing in a town called Karaz. And so that's really cool too, because if you do that route, like there are these towns that you can stop in that you can, dump your bags for a while and actually do some really fun, like single track riding, and some really fun running. And so I don't know that that's actually published anywhere.
I was about to ask you, where can people find it? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Brendan has the route. I don't think we've ever actually published it publicly, but it's definitely something that like either he or I could send a GPX track. It would be a very large one.
Yeah.
But it's
Is
a cool
Peru more hard than it is beautiful, or more beautiful than it is hard?
It's very much both. Very much both. Yeah. It's hard. It's really hard. And it's really beautiful. It's stunning.
Earn those views,
so
huh?
Yeah. I mean, and so we went there, let's see, October, November. We were there in the late fall. And so we were there like right before the rainy season and at the start of the rainy season. And so we had some gnarly weather, and that made it tough. I mean, we were climbing up. So most of it was on single track. Some of it was on like quote unquote road, right? Like Peruvians can drive a Jeep on it, but it's not like cars are going fast. And then the only section that we rode that was actual road that people drive cars up was Huascarán Pass. And I remember climbing Huascarán Pass in like a sleet storm, and it was so cold, and I had forgotten warm gloves. And so I had wool socks over my hands and, climbing up there, and it was like 17,000 feet or something. And at that point I was well acclimated. Like the route starts at the ocean basically. And climbs up to, I think maybe the highest elevation was around 17,000 or something. But you have 6 days. I think we had like 6 or 7 days to acclimate, between sea level and then when we actually got up into the mountains. So Cordillera Negra is first, and then you drop down into Caraz, and then you go up into the Cordillera Blanca. And so by the time you're up there, you got time to acclimate. But that was tough. Like the climbing was really tough. And, it was like, I'd bike packed a bunch by then, but I wasn't as good at it as I am now in terms of my packing strategy. And so I was probably packed too heavy, but also it was like we had to pack for like winter conditions. And so then maybe I wasn't packed too heavy. So yeah, it's hard for sure, but it's just incredible. I mean, it's very, very worth it, but that's one that you want to be very fit. I mean, you got to be mentally tough too, but if you're not very fit, you're probably not going to make it past like day 4.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a fair warning. Out of all the places that you've been personally, do you have a favorite adventure that you've been on, or a favorite place that you visited on bike?
Guatemala.
All right. Easy answer.
Yeah.
So what is it about Guatemala? We keep coming back to Guatemala. What is it about it that is special to you and like so many other people that I like follow on the internet? Everybody who goes to Guatemala just raves about it.
Yeah, I mean, the culture and the people, like everybody's so incredible, and the riding is really, really good. It's really high quality. Like I've ridden all over the world, and there's a lot of adventure to be had, but in Guatemala, there's a lot of adventure to be had, and there's also really high quality single track. And so, like a lot of the tours that Brendan is riding or is running now are like enduro style tours, where you're riding like pretty gnarly trails. And, when I was there that year that I was there riding with everybody, like, I have literally hundreds of miles of GPX tracks on my Gaia. I track on all my rides, and it's all single track. And so, I think the combination of like really high quality mountain biking and the people and the culture and the food and just all of it, is what made Guatemala really special. And I connected with it a lot more than the other places I've been because I put down roots there for a time, as much roots as a nomad can put down.
Yeah.
And so, I think those are the reasons. Pakistan was also a standout for sure. Like that was kind of a very surprising standout. Like a lot of people, when I said I was going to Pakistan, a lot of people were really afraid for me. And like the people there are incredible. Like the hospitality in Pakistan is unlike anything I've ever experienced. Like everybody in Pakistan has a guest room in their house, and it's not for friends and family, it's for strangers. Like literally they have a guest room and their culture is to invite strangers into their home to stay and to feed them and to have tea. And so my teammate and I would be like riding up, some like road or trail or whatever, and we would have people literally like explode out of their houses and run after us and yell and wave us down, and we're like, oh, what's going on? And turns out they wanted to invite us over for dinner.
They've had this room just collecting dust. They're just
Yeah,
so
right.
excited to have someone come and visit. Like, we got this whole room, might as well use it.
Hmm.
That's
Yeah, and so
amazing.
that was stand out because it was just really like it was. I didn't expect that. I didn't know anything about the culture in Pakistan, and it was like the people were just incredible. There were definitely a lot more barriers in Pakistan, though. Like the year that I was there, which was 2019, like the country had really started opening up to foreigners just that year. Like I was there I started my trip in November, I think, and it was just that spring that the like new kind of leadership, governmental leadership in Pakistan was allowing foreigners to travel through the country without a guide, or police escort, which is the way it had been before. And so, you know, we were able to travel around freely without a guide or a police escort, but because it was so new, like they were keeping really close tabs on us. Like there are these police checkpoints, military checkpoints that we'd have to present our passport and, tell them where we're going. And like there was one instance where we had to cross this 12,000-foot pass, and we were there in the winter because if you want to go in the river in Pakistan, you have to go in the winter. Otherwise, you're going to die because the rivers are huge there. And so, we were there in the winter and we were trying to cross this snowy pass called Shandur Pass between Chitral and Gilgit. And we had one day for our weather window, like literally one day. And we were like bookended by huge winter storms. And the guard at the military checkpoint did not want to let us go over the pass. And I think it was because of me, because in the Islamic culture, like women are not adventurers, right? Like there are some that are. My friend Summer is a very notable exception, and she's like a hero for half the country and hated by the rest of the country because she's this woman
Mm,
that's doing things that like women don't do in that culture, right? And so, we're there trying to convince this guy to let us go over the pass. And it's like time is of the essence. This is not a fast up and over. This is like a day long thing. Like, not to mention, we're riding fat bikes in the snow that are loaded down with 100 pounds of weight because we have pack rafts and dry suits and PFDs and shit. And so we were there for like 2 hours, and the guy is like making us tea and he's super friendly, but he's like trying to save us from ourselves. And so the thing that finally got him to let us go, I had this thought of like pulling out my phone. And fortunately, I had photos of myself like doing lots of these types of adventures. And, there was this photo of me ski mountaineering where I'm like, I have ice axes and crampons and skis on my back, and I'm like climbing this couloir. And like mountaineering is huge in Pakistani culture, right? And so that's something that they know. And, the guide culture is something that they know. And so I showed him this picture of me mountaineering, and I explained to him that like I'm a mountain guide in the US, and that's not totally true. I'm not a guide, but like that's what they're familiar with. They're not
right.
familiar with just people just doing this stuff on their own. And so I said, in the US, females are mountain guides, and this is what I do, and this is me. He's like, that's you? Oh yeah. And so after seeing that, he let us go.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then, we're going over the pass, and a couple hours later I hear this yelling behind us, and it's this guy and a bunch of other military guys, and they're yelling, and I go to my partner and my teammate, I'm like, we got to hurry, they're going to stop us. But they're wearing like literally nothing. They're like in tennis shoes, like running through the snow. We're carrying bikes, so they reach us, and this time they're just excited, and they're like, you guys are so strong, you're doing so good, we want to hike with you. And we're like, okay. So, they hiked with us to the top of the pass. And at the top of the pass, there's this like military complex, basically. And, they basically convinced us, they're like, a storm's coming in, like, stay the night with us here. We'll feed you dinner. We'll hang out. We'll drink wine. you know? And so, so then we're like, okay, so we stay there with them. And then we, ended up like going across the pass in the morning, and it was snowing, but at that point it was fine. Like we'd gotten over the main part of it. And so, just like all sorts of experiences like that, where the Pakistani people were trying to save us from ourselves. We had a similar experience on the rivers because like whitewater kayaking is not something that people do there. And so when we were trying to put our pack rafts in on the river, especially with the bikes on board, like we had to find a place to do it that nobody could see us. Otherwise, people would come down and try to convince us not to go, and, try to like call for help. And, they were very invested in us not killing ourselves in their country, which is understandable, right? Like,
It's a bad look. Yeah. They
yeah,
don't
that
want
would be
tourists
terrible.
dying.
Yeah, if like, the country had just opened to letting people move freely throughout the country on their own, and then we die in this expedition because we don't have a guide or a police escort, AK, like that's what they would think. And so, of course, we didn't want that to happen. And so we understood, but it was also pretty complicated. Whereas in Guatemala, like Guatemala's cowboy, they're like, whatever, do what the hell you want. And so, yeah, that was kind of a big contrast between those two experiences, but like just both very unique and special and eye-opening. Yeah.
Yeah. Adventurous. Yeah. That's how you get to learn about the world. That's experiential learning about the world that we live in, which, yeah, just kind of reverberates, I think, through your life. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about your concussion. I'm curious, like what, I know you got a concussion. I know it was on a bike ride. I'm curious, like, what happened, and I'm also curious if the concussion is the thing that led towards the end of your career as a professional athlete.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my concussion happened on October 31st, 2020, and I just raced Pinions and Pines in Flagstaff a few weeks before, and had come back. I'd taken a couple weeks off, and Dan and I were just on a backyard bike ride. We were in Logan, Utah at the time. That's where he went to back to grad school to get his master's. And so we were on a ride, and we had, done like 3 hours of climbing, and we were at the very top of the mountain, and we were just, about to descend. And the trail wasn't that technical where I crashed. It was actually not at all technical where I crashed, but it was overgrown. And so, I was crashing through like overgrown willows with each end of my handlebar. And I was going like, I think my GPS to like 23 miles an hour or something. And all of a sudden I felt my left finger, my left hand, my finger that was on the brake hit something hard. And next thing I know, I'm flying through the air, and, I was clipped in. And so my first thing that hit was my head on the trail. And then I scorpioned, and my bike like flipped over on top of me and landed on me.
Scorpioned with your feet attached to your bike?
Yeah. So pretty major whiplash on that one as well. And so, what had happened is there was a baby aspen tree that was probably like 2 or 3 inches in diameter that somebody had cut off, and they cut it off like right at handlebar height. And so I hit that with my handlebar, and that compressed my front brake, and I went from like 20 plus miles an hour to straight on my head. And so, yeah, and Dan didn't see it. He was a little ways behind me, and I was on the ground, and I don't think I got knocked out, but I remember flying. I remember the feeling of like, oh shit, I'm flying through the air. And then, if I did get knocked out, it was only a couple seconds, because I remember being on the ground and like thinking I was dead for a second. I was like, am I dead? Like, what happened? And then I like realized because I was definitely like very shaken, and so I was like, am I dead? And then I kind of started coming to a little bit, and I was like, no, I'm not dead. Am I paralyzed? And I started moving my feet. No, I'm not paralyzed. My bike is still attached to me. My feet are over my head, and then I'm thinking, oh, I don't want Dan to run into me. So I'm like just staying quiet. And then I hear Dan's tires on the dirt, and I yell to him like, stop, I crashed. And he, like both of us are wilderness first responders, and so he got my bike off of me and did an assessment to make sure my neck wasn't broken. And I wasn't. And so I stood up, and I don't remember this part. Apparently I rode out. It was like the 3,000 foot descent that I rode out, and I don't remember any of that. And so, I guess he drove me home. I definitely didn't drive. And I guess where my memories start after that was being in the house with him, like later that evening, and all of a sudden just getting hit with like symptoms like dizziness, nausea, like extreme sensitivity to light, like, irritable, like just all of the things just like hit me at once. And I remember just standing in the kitchen, he was making dinner, and I was like, I got to go to bed. So I went to bed, and, woke up a couple hours later, and I'm a PT. I know what concussion is, and I was like, oh shit, like I definitely have a concussion. And so that's how it happened.
So it took you a while to realize that you had a concussion.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things you're not supposed to do is lay down, right?
Oh no, you can lay down. Yeah.
You can take a nap?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that's one of the myths.
Totally
okay.
Fine. That's a big myth. That's a big piece of misinformation. So if you if you aren't showing signs of a moderate or severe brain injury, which would be like, confusion that's increasing, like, blood or fluid coming out of your nose and ears, like you get like super irritated, combative, agitated, like deteriorating mental state effectively, like double vision that doesn't go away immediately, like dizziness and lack of coordination that only, lasts more than a few seconds. Like those are all red flags that A, you should go to the emergency room. But B, like that's a sign of a moderate or severe TBI, not a concussion. And so with those people, you do not want to let them, I mean, you can let them fall asleep, but those are the people you got to wake up, because if they're deteriorating, they might be going downhill and they probably got a brain bleed or something that's a lot more serious. But for concussion,
Okay.
like sleep is actually really important in brain healing. And so as long as the person is stable, or if you're the person, as long as you're stable, it's totally fine and good to like sleep a full night.
Okay. And is that what ended your professional career as an athlete?
Yeah, it did. Although it took a while to end it. I like, and the reason that I still, so that's this has been 4.5 years now, and the reason that I
Wow.
still struggle with some symptoms and some issues to this day is that I really did my recovery wrong. And I knew a lot more about concussion as a PT than most people, but I was not a concussion specialist at the time. I didn't have specialty training, and there's a lot you miss when you don't have specialty training. Like it is a very, very specialized and very nuanced subset of physical therapy. And like basically what I did is I like initially, yeah, you have the symptoms. So like acute concussion, right? Like you're going to have all of the symptoms. You're going to have like dizziness, lightheadedness, like headache, fatigue, like, some blurry vision, some clumsiness, like a lot of fatigue. And then like cognitive symptoms, you're going to feel like you're kind of slow. You're not with it. We call it brain fog. Difficulty with executive functioning stuff, like making a meal potentially, or like organizing your day. And then like emotional signs like irritability, anxiety, depression, like being like more easily triggered into an emotional response than usual. And so those are the signs that a lot of people have when they first get a concussion, and those signs they're due to the actual concussive injury. And so what happens when we get a concussion or any kind of brain injury is that our brain gets shaken around in our skull. And you can imagine like jello, if you put jello on a plate and you shake the plate, right? Like all of that jello moves. And so what happens when that jello brain moves is the nerve cells get stretched all at once. And inside of our nerve cells, we have all of these molecules. And outside of our nerve cells, we have all of these other molecules. And there's channels in the nerve cells that open for molecules to exchange when our nerve cells fire, right? Like that's how we live. That's how our body does everything, is through the firing of those nerve cells in our brain, right? And so when all of those nerve cells are shaken and stretched at the same time, all of those channels are stretched and they open. And so all of the molecules that are in the brain cells go flooding out, and all of the ones that are outside go flooding in all at once. And so it's this massive, like, it's literally a brainstorm, right? It's this like massive neurochemical reaction. And that is what causes the initial symptoms after a concussion. And so it also causes inflammation in your brain. It causes altered blood flow in your brain. And it starts in your brain, but then it goes throughout your entire body. And so it becomes systemic. You've got systemic inflammation, and it affects your autonomic nervous system, which controls your heart and your lungs and your temperature regulation ability, and like your digestion, like all of that is impacted by a concussion. Your vision. So 60% of our brain is devoted to vision. And so visual
Wow.
disturbance, yeah, after a concussion is really common. And so in the first 3 to 4 weeks after my concussion, I had all of these symptoms pretty consistently. And I knew enough to know that I should not hit my head again, within the first month after a concussion. And so I stayed off the bike. I couldn't have ridden anyway because my balance was so bad. But what I did wrong is, I still had this like, gotta train like a pro athlete mindset. And so within that first week or so, I was back on the trainer doing high intensity workouts. And in my mind, I rationalized like, oh, I can't fall off the trainer and hit my head, or like I could, but like I wasn't that dizzy, like I'm not going to fall off the trainer and hit my head. And so I was pushing myself and doing these high intensity workouts way too quickly. And so what happens when you do that is your brain is just expanding all of this energy, And when you have the concussive energy or the concussive injury, your brain goes into an energy crisis because of all of that, what I just described earlier with all of the molecules and the neurotransmitters, right? And so the energy level in your brain will drop to somewhere between like 20 to 40% lower than it usually is, right? So you've got this lower energy level in your brain, and it takes somewhere between 3 to 6 weeks for that energy level to actually rise back up to normal, right? Which is why you should not get another concussion during that time frame, because your brain already has less energy. And if you hit your head again during that time frame, it's going to drop even more. And once you're at lower than 60% energy capacity, you start to get death of your brain cells, which we don't want that, right? And so it's really...
I don't have enough left.
Yeah, right? I think a lot of us could say that. And so what was happening with me was my brain was already at that lower energy capacity. And when I was trying to do high intensity training, that takes a lot of energy out of your brain and your body. And my brain already didn't have enough energy to begin with. And so that perpetuated my symptoms, and that caused persistent symptoms. That caused my symptoms to last longer than that month that is considered like subacute concussion.
So if you hadn't have done that, would you have made a full recovery by now, or is there any way to know that?
I mean, there's no way to know that, but it's likely. It's pretty likely. The other thing that I didn't understand at the time is that insomnia was a symptom of me effectively overdoing it too much, right? Like a lot of people with concussions get sleep disturbance. And for me, the sleep disturbance was exercise related, because I was either riding too hard on the trainer, or, I also started training on skis. I was training for a ski packraft expedition in Alaska at the time. And so I was like out doing big days on skis, and I was like, oh, I can't hit my head if I'm just like skinning around. Like I wasn't actually making turns, I was just skinning. It's like, I can't hit my head if I'm just skinning, but I'd go out for like 6-hour days, and then I do these hard workouts on the bike. And so I was depleting my energy. And then that was causing insomnia. And so I wasn't sleeping. And so, sleep is when our body clears inflammation from our brain and from, the rest of our body. And I wasn't sleeping. And so I wasn't clearing that inflammation. And the entire first year to year and a half after my concussion, it was very rare for me to sleep more than 3 or 4 hours a night for over an entire year.
Yeah.
And so, because I didn't realize I knew the insomnia was related to the concussion, because that is a common symptom. But in a lot of people, it's more anxiety based, or sometimes it's autonomic based, but that part gets better. And I didn't have any anxiety. And I'd never heard of it being exercise based. Usually you think of exercise actually helping sleep, right?
Right.
And it does, but I was just way overdoing it. So after concussion, it is good to do exercise. That's part of what, increases or helps regulate the blood flow in our brain, and helps to clear inflammation, and helps to relieve symptoms. But you want to do low intensity, sub symptom threshold exercise, right? If you're pushing yourself way up into your symptom threshold, you're just overloading your brain. And so for me, that was manifesting by giving me insomnia. And I was just pushing through symptoms. I was like, all right, it's, I've got a headache, but I'm going to keep going. It'll get better eventually, and those major symptoms, the headaches and the dizziness and everything like that did get better eventually, with me pushing, even though I was pushing way too hard, but the insomnia didn't. And so I literally had insomnia. I mean, it was awful for the first year, but I had insomnia for 3 years. It was literally the fall of 2023 when I finally realized what was causing my insomnia and started backpedaling and trying to correct it. And so,
how did you figure out that was the problem?
Finally, so in 2023, I was racing a bunch. I did 3 bike pack races, I think. And I did a few bigger bike pack packraft trips. And I was just not sleeping. And I was feeling really good otherwise. I did a race up in Washington called the Olympic Gravel Circumnavigation, which was a mixed terrain race. It was 450 miles around the Olympic Peninsula. And I felt like myself. I broke the women's record in that race by 8 hours. And I finished, I think, 3rd or 4th overall or something. And, I felt amazing, but I wasn't sleeping during the race at all. I would lay down and just lay there. And, the issue isn't not sleeping during a 4-day race. The issue is not sleeping in life. Right. And so I came into that depleted. And by the time I finished the end of the 2023 season, it was like, I felt like with every pedal stroke, I was digging my own grave. Like that's literally how it felt. And I had started the AZT 300 that fall, and I really wanted to do it. And my issue is I'm such an optimist, and like I am opposite of the people that don't try things. Like I am 100%. Like my philosophy is like, oh, maybe it'll be great. Like give it a go. What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah.
And that's what kept me doing all these things I shouldn't have been doing during the time that my health was literally just like going down the toilet. And so after the AZT, I mean, I was on like day 2 of the AZT, feeling like I was digging my own grave, like walking through molasses. And I remember like sitting up, I look over here because the Santa Ritas are right there. So I'm in the Santa Ritas, and I'm sitting on the trail, and I call my friend Esther Harani, or I text my friend Esther Harani. And she and I had been on a bikepacking mountain running trip together a couple weeks prior where the same thing had happened. Like I just couldn't go. Like I had all this fitness, but I didn't have the energy to use it. And, I had told her I felt like I was digging my own grave. And so I'm up there in the Santa Ritas, and I text Ez, and I was like, I feel like I'm digging my own grave again. I don't know what to do. And she just goes, stop digging. And I was like, okay. So I pulled out of the AZT, and I was like, I am in a bad way. Like I need to get some help. And I had all of these people around me over that past year, like giving me this narrative of like, oh, it's not your concussion. Like, it's not your brain injury. That was 4 years ago. Like, you're just getting older. Like, you're 40 now. Like, you're slowing down. It's okay. Just embrace it. And I was like, no, like, I know there's something wrong. Like, I know there's something wrong. And like, all of this started when my head hit the ground. Like before my head hit the ground, I was a freaking pro ultra endurance athlete. Like I was a great sleeper. Like I never had trouble sleeping during races, never had trouble sleeping in like loud airports. I was like, everything changed the day my head hit the ground, and I can't let this go. And so I found this concussion specialty physician that has a clinic here in Tucson called Spark Sports Medicine. And I went to see him, and I explained everything that was happening. And, literally he just listened to my story, and he was like, oh, you've got exercise intolerance. And I was like, no, I don't. Did you not just listen to all the shit that I do? Like, who do you think you're talking to? Like, don't diagnose me with exercise intolerance. But,
yeah.
I didn't say that, but I think I, looked at him with a look that said those things, and so then he explained it to me, and he explained that like when I was exercising, I pushed it too hard for so long that my brain's firing patterns and my autonomic nervous system that controls my heart basically habituated to faulty patterns. And so now that's the way it operates, right? So like when I exercise for too long of a duration or for too high of an intensity, my nervous system goes into sympathetic mode, which everyone's does. Like, so sympathetic nervous system is what we think of as like fight or flight, right? It's not just fight or flight. It's also like active and ready, right? It's not just like when we have anxiety or we're running from a bear. It's like when we're exercising, our sympathetic nervous system is working. That's how it is, right? And so after I exercise for too long or too hard, my nervous system, my brain is not able to switch my nervous system from sympathetic back over to parasympathetic, which is our rest, digest, sleep, recover nervous system. And so I would lay there awake all night long after riding my bike for 20 plus hours, like tired and exhausted, but my brain was active. And so when he explained that to me, I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. So that's how I found out what was happening. And since then, I mean, that's been, October 2023. So it's been over a year. Well over a year.
So was the advice to just take it easy for a while?
Well, so no. So the first thing he said to me was like, you need to just like wipe any thoughts of racing off your mind for at least the next year, because that's just too much. And, multi-day trips. But so the treatment for exercise intolerance is exercise. And exercise is literally the number one most evidence-based, well-researched technique to heal concussion. But you have to do it right? Like, okay. I didn't do it right. I way overdid it. And so the way that we correct that, and, the way that I now help people avoid, what I've been through, is like using exercise as rehabilitation technique, but you have to go way back to the point where you are not provoking symptoms. Right. And so the tricky thing with me is I don't have any symptoms besides insomnia. Like I feel great when I'm riding. And
Mm.
so I had to start at like, riding for 30 minutes, 5 days a week with my heart rate under like 130 beats per minute or something like that. Or maybe it was 120. I don't remember. But that low. And that was so hard for me at the time because I still, I still couldn't wrap my head around this. And the other thing that he inspired me at this first visit, like he's the one that inspired me to go and get concussion specialty training. And so when I walked out of his office, like after he had just blown my mind with this piece of knowledge that I didn't have, I was like, I need to know these things. Like I need to get this education. And I could do that because, concussion specialty training is a postgraduate thing for physical therapists and physicians and chiropractors and, someone who's already a healthcare provider. And so I walked out of his office and I signed up for my first like 3 month intensive, postgraduate concussion specialty training course. And so, I basically was mentored and taught by leading experts and researchers in the field for 3 months. And now it's been almost over a year of that type of training. But, at the time, he was kind of guiding me on what to do. And so I had to start with just those short rides on the trainer and then gradually working my way up to, okay, now you can ride outside. So riding outside is a lot more visually stimulating than riding on the trainer. And, I said a little bit earlier that 60% of our brain deals with vision. And so if we have any type of visual disturbance following concussion, which I did, that also makes it a lot harder on your brain, right? So your brain is now trying to like regulate your heart rate and your blood pressure and your breathing when you're exercising. And then when you're outside, especially on a mountain bike trail, you've got all these visually stimulating things. And then you're also trying to keep your balance on a trail, which pings your vestibular system, which is also involved in concussion. All right. And your neck is also super involved. So any concussion injury also has a whiplash injury. So it takes like 70 to 120 Gs to create a concussion, which is about the equivalent of like running into a wall at 20 miles an hour. It only takes 4 Gs to create whiplash. And whiplash and concussion have very similar symptoms. So mountain biking is a really taxing activity on your brain for all of these reasons. And so once I started riding outside, I had to pull it even further back. So like very low heart rate, very low duration. And then basically I would just have to wait and see if I slept that night, And
Right.
if I didn't sleep, then I had to go easier. And if I did sleep, then okay, that's a good sign. I can keep going, And so just gradually, like working my way up. And I did bike and run, it wasn't all on the bike. And that's how you do it. And that's what I work people through now, ideally who aren't as messed up as I am, but I do get people that have done it wrong.
Hopefully you catch them early.
Well. I know, exactly. That's the hope. And, that's why I'm so passionate about like awareness and advocacy and outreach and everything for post-concussion, because if you catch it early, it's really treatable, and it's treatable even years later, but like early intervention is really key to preventing persistent symptoms. And I think that I would have probably been just fine if I had known then what I know now.
I bet that holds water for physical therapy as well. Like early diagnosis and treatment early can help prevent persistent problems in the long run. So that's probably just like your mantra as a person that's trying to heal people and keep them well.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same. Like the brain is an organ, just like your muscles and your skin and your bones and all your other organs. Like it's a body part, right? And so like if you break your leg or if you tear your ACL, like if you break your leg, you're not going to go out and try to run on that. Like you let it heal and you do corrective exercise.
Not unless you're David Goggins.
Right. Then I don't even, God help him.
Yeah. He needs a live-in physical therapist.
Yeah.
What about for you? Will you, do you have hopes that you'll make a full recovery from your concussion symptoms?
I don't know that hope is the right word. Hope is a tricky thing for me because hope has gotten me into a lot of trouble.
Right.
I started, in the years between like my injury in 2020 and when I officially, quote unquote, retired from being a pro sponsored athlete at the end of 2023. So that was a long winded answer to the question. Yes, that is why I what ended my athletic career. So during those 3 years, it was hope that made me make all these bad decisions. Like I would line up for a race being like, I hope this works. I hope this goes okay. I hope my brain can handle it, you know? And
Yeah.
like the thing that finally got me to like pretty much quit wholesale was like, I was supposed to go to New Zealand in early 2024 to race Tour Te Waipanamu.
Hmm.
And like I could like the two parts of me were fighting, right? Like the athlete part and the PT part, you know, that now knew a lot more than I knew before. And I had this hope that I could get better enough to go and like race and feel good. And, you know, I've had so much experience of that exact thing that like that's a very visceral experience in my entire body and brain of like racing and feeling really strong and feeling really good. And so, you know, I'd always be like, oh, I have this hope that if I just try, maybe it'll be fine. And then that's how I ran myself into the ground, you know? And so like hope is dangerous for me. And so I like to really stay in the now. Like I am a
All
person that
right.
has to be where I'm at, you know? And right now, where I am at, I can ride my bike or run or hike or whatever, pack raft. I can exercise for somewhere between 3 and 4 hours at a heart rate that's moderate, like 140, 150, maybe climbing a little bit, right? If I push past that in either intensity or duration, I get insomnia. And I have been plateaued at that place for months. And so, you know, like,
Yeah.
will I ever
To
get
be
back
determined.
to
Yeah.
TBD? Yeah, you know, and like, sure, I would love, I mean, I don't know that I will ever return to racing. Like, I've said that I probably won't, but who knows, you know, like one of the things that I truly believe, because it's true, it's something that I learned at a Vipassana, like 10-day silent meditation retreat that I was at. It is like, this will also change, right? Like everything changes. We all know that. And
Yeah.
we've all experienced that, but most of us don't actually really think about it, right? Like literally everything changes. And so I can say right now, because I am a person who needs to be where I'm at, that racing is off the table. Expedition work is off the table. Even a multi-day mellow bikepacking trip is off the table. Um, and that's just where I'm at right now. And, you know, will that change? I have no idea. But, you know, where I'm at right now is just still trying to, like, I'm still curious, right? Like, I wouldn't say I'm hopeful, but I'm curious. And for
Yeah.
me, like, curiosity is still dangerous, but that's, I can control that a little bit more, right? And so my curiosity right now is like, can I ride 4.5 hours and still be able to sleep that night?
Yeah.
Can I push my heart rate up to 165 and still be able to sleep that night? You know, so it's like
You're still
anything.
answering the question, you know, what can my body do? So like as an athlete, right, you're always asking the question like how far can I push? How
Yeah.
far can I go without sleep? Whatever. Like you're still asking similar questions, but the criteria has changed. The playing field has changed a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's a very good way to put it.
So is this
I'm not sitting on my laurels being like, oh, this is as good as it gets, you know, which like it's pretty
yeah.
good. Like most people, you know, people point this out all the time. Like most people can't even ride their bikes for 4 hours, you know, and that's great. But like, would I love to be able to ride all day again? Yes. Would I love to be able to
Yeah.
ride into the night again? Of course, you know, we'll see.
But yeah, it's more valuable to live in the moment instead of punishing yourself with all these, I wish I could, or I hope that one day. It's better to just live in the moment and appreciate what you have. And I mean, that's
Mhm.
great life advice across the board, but it's oftentimes easier said than done.
Yeah,
So
like appreciate what I have and also be curious about what's possible.
yeah, exactly.
But
Which
not
is,
way up here, you know, like down here. Like I tell my clients, like we have a few different baselines, right? The baseline is healthy human, right? Like if you're somebody who like you have a ton of symptoms, you're not healthy, you can't even exercise for an hour, like you're not sleeping, like you're anxious, whatever, like you are not a healthy human, right? So we got to get you to baseline of healthy human. Once you get to healthy human, you can explore the athlete realm. Can I be an athlete? Okay, where can I find myself in this realm? If the answer is yes, okay, what kind of athlete can I be? Can I start to set big goals? Can I start to be more ambitious? Can I maybe compete again? Right. And so that's like the three stages that I like to talk about. And I'm in that second stage of like, can I be an athlete? What kind of athlete can I be? Like, I'm a healthy
yeah,
human now, thank God. Right. Like, that took, I don't know, all of 2024 And I got 2 more concussions in 2024, not sport related. I got hit in the head with a ladder and with a flying piece of metal roof that came off a camper in a windstorm. So like,
Jesus Christ.
yeah, I'm like a magnet for head injuries. And so I've had a couple setbacks this past year, but like, really like end of 2023 to end of 2024 was all about like, how do I be a healthy human again? Like I wasn't thinking at all about being an athlete. And, basically since the end of 2024, I'm in this space of like, okay, I'm a healthy human. I feel good. I'm sleeping well in life. Now can I be an athlete? So that,
that's
like,
a good way to break it down.
Yeah. So it's like a combination of like acceptance of where you're at and gratitude for what you can do and curiosity about what's possible, but not so much that you're pushing so hard that you're messing yourself up,
Balance.
Yeah.
The elusive word balance.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we haven't mentioned it yet, but you literally wrote a book on concussions. And I think it's obvious that what's inspired you to be so passionate about this is your own personal experience with concussions. So did you write the book just to help people to avoid some of your pitfalls, or just promulgate the information that you learn that you think isn't as widely available in the narrative when we're talking about concussions at large?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, all of those things, So the book is called Think You Might Have a Concussion. Here's what you need to know, what to do next, and what not to do.
A very simple title for anyone who might be concussed.
Exactly. Yeah, it just says what it is, right? Like, if you think you might have a concussion, here are the things to know. Here's what you need to do. Here's what you should not do, right? And so, I wrote it for 2020 me. And that's,
right.
that's kind of that's the simple version. It's
that's
like
who you would have wrote it to. The things that I wish I knew when.
Yeah, exactly. These are the things that I wish I knew when. And since my concussion, and, I was pretty outspoken about it on social media and have been the whole time. It's like, I get all these people that send me DMs and things, especially now that I'm an actual expert in the subject, like, telling me their stories. And there's so many people that just didn't know, like early on. And when you don't know, you can't do anything else. Like, I don't blame past me for messing myself up because I didn't know any better, It's hard not to do that, but like, I didn't know. You can't blame someone for something they don't know. And so like, I wrote it for 2020 me, but I also wrote it for anybody out there who has experienced a concussion, whether it's, recent or even years ago, and you're still having symptoms and you're like, is there anything I can do? Is this as good as it gets? Like, no, it's not, right? Like, you can improve. Like, even if you never get to 100%, which a lot of people do, even years after. Some people don't. Some people still deal with symptoms throughout their lives. But even years after a concussion, like, the brain is so like changeable. We call it plastic, but that sounds weird, but that's, it's easily changing. It's very adaptable. And so we can build these neural patterns with active rehabilitation. And that's really the key. And, so this book is really like, here are the things that you should start doing. And if you are someone who's recently had a concussion and it's been more than 5 to 7 days and you still have symptoms, you need to get actual help from a concussion specialist. And so, that has been proven in the research that early intervention from someone who is concussion literate will help avoid persistent symptoms. And so if I can help people avoid that, what I went through, like, that's great. And then, for people that have persistent symptoms, it is still worth seeing a concussion specialist and working on all of the things that you never worked on before.
So let's give some people some real world scenarios. A lot of people that listen to this podcast are going to be adventurous. They might be on like a remote backcountry bikepacking trip or a bikepacking race or something. Obviously, hitting your head on a bike, I don't know. I bet that's one of the number one injuries that are out. I'm just completely guessing, right? But it's so common to hit your head when cycling. So like, what should people do if they hit their head on a bike ride, or even, like you said, like really severe whiplash? Like, what are the things that, if you're in the backcountry, you're on a bike ride, you should be really paying attention to if you have any kind of impact like that?
Yeah. So the first thing to do is, if you have had like a high speed crash, whether or not you hit your head, because you don't actually need to hit your head to get a concussion, like a hard body blow at that impact is enough. Because remember, it's the brain shaking around, right? And
Yeah.
so if you have a high speed impact with the ground, you should probably not get right back on your bike, right? Like you should, depending on the situation, right? If you're bike packing, like make camp, like call it for the day. And if you're on a day ride, like get yourself out of there safely, like ideally walking. Because, like me, like some people don't have symptoms come on right away. And some people do. So you want to, check yourself for symptoms. And, we talked about those symptoms earlier, but, feeling dizzy, feeling lightheaded, feeling like your balance and equilibrium is just a little bit off, feeling like hyper emotional, really irritable, feeling like you're not thinking quite right. Like those are kind of the thing, like maybe some nausea. Like those are the things that people tend to notice right away. It's like, oh, I just feel kind of off.
Yeah.
If you crash and you feel kind of off and you sit down and you wait, 10, 15, 20 minutes and you're still feeling kind of off, chances are you do have a concussion. And so at that point, the most important thing to do is not get another one. And cycling is a really good way to get a concussion, right? And so
Especially if you're concussed.
exactly, if you're concussed, like your vision is not going to be working right, your balance is going to be off, and you're going to be a lot more prone to having another crash and then having another concussion, right? And so if you get two concussions in that short amount of time, the impacts can be like having a severe traumatic brain injury. You can actually get something called second impact syndrome, which can kill you. And so, like, that is the most important thing to know is like, if you have a high speed crash, do not get back on your bike. Like, make camp, make sure you don't have any of the red flag signs, right? Like, if your mental status is deteriorating, if you're getting more and more confused, if you have a headache that gets like worse and worse and worse, and you feel like your brain's going to explode, right? Like, if you're vomiting repeatedly, if you have seizures, like, probably need to be pushing the button on your inReach because that probably means you have more than a concussion. Okay.
Okay.
And then, if you're not having those symptoms, if you're not deteriorating, like make camp, take a rest, try to walk out, get someone to come rescue you or whatever. And then once you're out of the backcountry, like watch yourself over the next couple of days to see if you're developing symptoms. And, any of those symptoms we already talked about, like those can come on over hours or days. And so, that's the most important thing to do if you are in the backcountry or you're on a bike ride and you have a real fast crash. And if you have a crash that isn't necessarily high speed, but maybe you hit your head, and you got a dent in your helmet and you're getting a headache, like same thing, like you might not have a concussion, but you might. And so it's best to play it safe, especially when bikes are involved, because you don't want to get another one.
I think that's so hard to do in real time. I just mentioned I had a concussion 2 years ago, and I talked to Indiana Schultz recently on the podcast, who we're all pretty sure he finished the Arizona Trail Race with a concussion. Like your body feels like it still can, but it sounds like what's dangerous is that you really shouldn't do it. But it's hard, I feel like, in the real time to convince yourself that I need to, because if you're doing, whether it's an expedition, a bike tour, a race, you took off time for work, you bought the gear, you planned, you trained, like you have so much invested. I think the hardest thing to do is to know when to call it. You know what I'm saying? I wonder do you have any good advice to people, like how to convince somebody that their long-term brain health is better than the short-term whatever they're doing right now, Because I think that is the hard thing to convince an athlete, a person that feels capable, that they should stop, even though they feel like they could probably keep going, but maybe they shouldn't.
Right. Well, I mean, you only have one brain. Like, I just tell, like, don't be an idiot. And it is tough. And, I get it. Like, I'm an athlete too. Like, I have that mentality. And, I think what I would say is like, if you've crashed and you either had a high speed crash or like you did hit maybe it wasn't high speed, but you hit your head pretty hard, right? Our heads can take hits, right? Like we're not going to concuss ourselves if we just like knock our head on the ground, without having like the speed or the higher impact. But, if we have a crash, especially if it's high speed and we're not having symptoms right away, like adrenaline can keep us going, right? Like we have adrenaline when we're doing these things. And so like that can make us make bad decisions, right? And so like the thing to do is just chill out for a minute. And even if you want to keep moving forward, especially if you're racing, it's like always keep moving forward. That's what we do. Like walk your bike for a while and calm yourself down and calm your nervous system down and see what happens, right? Like chances are if you have a concussion, and you let your nervous system calm down and let the rush of adrenaline come out of your body, you're going to get the symptoms. You're going to feel the symptoms, right? And if you have symptoms and you decide to continue to keep riding your bike, like that's your choice, but you're definitely risking like literally death. Like if you hit your head again and get second impact syndrome, you could die, right? And if you don't die, like you're going to have, like we talked about that energy deficit that you get after the first concussion. If you get another one that quickly, you're going to drop your energy deficit below 60%. Your brain cells are going to start dying. So if you don't care about that, then great, keep going.
That's a good advice. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you
that
don't,
doesn't matter to you.
Yeah. And some people it doesn't, and that's fine. That's their choice. Like I'm not going to stop people from whatever, but like, even if you get lucky, right, and you keep going and you don't crash again and you don't get another concussion, what you're going to do is delay your recovery because, your brain has an energy deficit. You're pushing it to the point where like it's not going to be able to handle it. That energy deficit is going to keep going down, down, down. You're probably putting yourself in the world of persistent symptoms at that point. So you're probably prolonging your recovery, where a healthy, normal recovery, if you do it right, is 4 to 6 weeks. You're probably pushing that out to maybe 3 to 6 months at that point.
Yeah, which is a real selling point. Yeah, that's the selling point there. You want to get it back on your bike as soon as possible and out doing adventurous things. So
yeah, and you totally can. I mean, concussion is a treatable injury, and it's like if you do it the right way, it's the same thing as breaking a bone. Right? Like if you do it the right way with the right combination of like rest and like active rehabilitative exercise, not just rest. Like some people are like, oh, I'm going to go lay in a dark room. No, that's bad. Don't do that. Okay. Like exercise is medicine. You just have to do it the right way. Like you will heal most likely from a concussion in 4 to 6 weeks and you'll be able to get back on your bike and keep doing your thing, but you have to give it that time.
Yeah. When I got my concussion, it was very visceral and real. Like I remember, I could feel like my entire body was telling me that I needed to be careful and it was like a evolutionary thing that like everything in my body was telling me I just needed to chill the fuck out, and that I don't want to keep injuring my head again. I'm wondering what advice can you give to people like, so they have a concussion. When do they need to pick up your book and read that versus when do they need to call a specialist like you? Like how much of this can we go through on our own versus when do we need to, get professional help?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think like my book is educational, obviously. So like if you get in a bike crash and you think you might have a concussion, like pick it up right away and read it. And then you'll know what to do, right? You'll know all of the steps. If you, hear this information, find my book, whatever, like learn the information somehow, and it's been more than 5 to 7 days after your concussion and you still have symptoms, right? Then you need to go get help. But the thing that I really want people to understand, and this is what my book, I think what I at least tried to do a good job of in my book, is that even if your symptoms go away, your brain is not healed until 4 to 6 weeks after your injury. Right. So like most people have resolution of symptoms in 1 to 2 weeks. And then they think, oh, I'm fine. I can get back on my bike and I can, do all of the things. Like you can, but if you get another concussion in that time frame, your brain still has an energy deficit. Your brain still has inflammation. Your brain still has altered blood flow. Right. You're gonna potentially have that second impact syndrome and get another concussion, and then you're going to be off your bike for 4 to 6 months, right? Or dead. And so like we tell people that if you have symptoms, first 48 hours is supposed to be quote unquote relative rest. All right. That doesn't mean lay in a dark room and do nothing. That means like scale your activity way back so that your activity is not giving you increased symptoms. So like walking around your house, maybe going for a walk around the block, but then rest is really important. So in that first 48 hours, when your brain is first experiencing that energy crisis, you do need to be resting a lot. And, don't get back on your bike. Maybe spin on the trainer for 30 minutes if it feels good, right? So like relative rest for the first 48 hours. And then after that, you want to start introducing exercise, but you want to make it safe, AKA don't get another concussion. And you want it to be low intensity, and you want it to be below your symptom threshold, right? So if you've already got symptoms, you don't want exercise to exacerbate those symptoms. It's okay if you have symptoms to exercise. It's actually good because it helps to regulate the blood flow in your brain. And we need that, right? It helps to speed healing if you're exercising. But if you're increasing symptoms, that means you've overdone it and you've overloaded the system, right? So like low intensity exercise, not intervals, right? Intervals are hard for our brain and our body to manage because of the rise and fall of the heart rate and the blood pressure. So steady state, low intensity, sub symptom threshold. Okay. So that's like basically after 48 hours, that's what you want to be doing for the first month. And, you can increase that over the month as long as you're not putting yourself in a situation where you're going to hit your head. So like riding the trainer or like going jogging or whatever, as long as you're not pushing those symptoms above like a 3-point increase, right? So like say you go out for a jog, right? And it's like week 2 or something like that. Maybe you've got a headache that's like a 3 out of 10. You go for a jog, your headache stays at a 3, maybe goes up to a 4. You jog for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, you're fine, right? If you start jogging, you're going for 20, 30 minutes and your headache climbs to like a 5, 6, 7, like that's a good sign that the blood flow in your brain is being impacted by your exercise, right? You got to stop or at least back it way down. Yeah. So, working back into exercise slowly is a good progression, but
I don't know if you can hear me. I just lost my headphone. Oh no. Hold on one second.
Oh, there, gotcha.
Now we're cooking with fire. All right.
Okay. All right. So we were talking about like gradually increasing your exercise duration and intensity, right? After a concussion, after that first couple of days, but you want to keep it below the symptom threshold. One thing that I do want to say though, a lot of people that I get coming to me for concussion consultations, they've done a lot of passive treatments, right? Like they've gotten like, they do like hyperbaric oxygen therapy. They do red light therapy. They're doing craniosacral therapy. They're doing all of these things where people are doing a thing to them, right? Like those things aren't wrong, but what is actually going to move the needle is active rehabilitation, right? So like imagine you broke your leg and you need to be rehabilitated. If you just sit there and have passive interventions, you're not going to like retrain the muscles and the joints, and you're not going to retrain your movement the way you should. It's the same with your brain, right? So passive modalities are totally fine. They're not going to hurt. They might help. But what really moves the needle and what you really need is active rehabilitation. And so, what I tell people, circling back to kind of the original question of like, when you need to seek a concussion literate provider is if you're around a week, I'd say 5 to 7 days after a concussion, and you're still having pretty strong symptoms, you need to go see somebody. And that way you can start that process of active rehabilitation of like your neck, right? For that whiplash component, your visual system, your vestibular system, your like affective system is what we call it, but it's basically your psychological system, right? Like concussions mess with your mood. And so that's something to be addressed as well, because that's a huge piece of it. Like anxiety and depression that either is already present or that's caused by the concussion, that can also exacerbate symptoms. So that needs to be addressed, right? So like active rehabilitation of all of these different systems, as well as your autonomic nervous system and like your hormones, your neurotransmitters. Like we do supplementation for concussion. Diet is a huge thing. Sleep is a huge thing, right? All of these things need to be addressed in a very active way. And it's best to do that working with a provider that's trained in concussion rehabilitation and management. So
that's where you come in, is after 5 to 7 days, if you're still having ongoing problems, then you need coaching on how to safely get better and rehabilitate yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, if somebody gets a concussion and like, they can download my book and read what to do in the first, we read what to do and what not to do right away. Or if they if like sometimes people have trouble reading after a concussion, right? Because they have
Yeah.
blurred vision or they can't tolerate it. So then like I will do a consultation with people like that. I've done this where someone calls me and they get on a consultation with me and they say, I got a concussion 2 days ago. I have symptoms. What do I do? And then I talk them through the things to do and to not do in that first, 48 hours in that first week. And then, we start active rehab at typically around like day 5.
And where can people find your book? One good thing about her book I'll mention is that I think it's like 36 pages. So yeah,
It's
if
like
you
a
do
mini
have a
book.
concussion, it's not a week-long commitment to work your way through it. So it's ingestible if you have a concussion.
Mhm. Yeah, so you can go to my website. It's on there. It's elizasampey.com, ElizaSampey.com, and it's free. You put your email address in the thing and you download it. And I don't really email people that much. Like I email
And
every
then
so
she
often to
spams
say,
the crap
hey, do
out
you
of
have
you.
questions? Yeah. Yeah. And I know, nobody wants that. And I have had people like, I have had a couple people get offended that I'm asking for people's email address, but like, I like to have contact with the people that are reading my information. Right. And like, just about a week ago, I sent an email out calling for questions, and I'm going to do a Q&A for all the people that have read the book and have personal questions or just general questions or whatever. And so, people that have that resource and have questions, like I want to hear from those people and I want to be able to reach those people. So, yeah, you can
Nice.
find it at the website. It's on my Instagram. It's in my bio. At Eliza Sampey is my Instagram. You can put it in the show notes of this podcast if you want.
Yep. I will put it in the show notes so people can find it and be
Out
able
there.
to follow up with you. But hopefully no one ever gets a concussion ever again. But if they do, they can
Yeah.
contact you or read your book.
Hopefully not. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's a very, very treatable condition. So if you get a concussion, it's not the end of the world. You just need to do it right. You need to do
there you go.
right. Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you about something I thought was really interesting, and I'll see if I can pronounce this correctly. It's Vipassana course, a Vipassana course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. Vipassana. Yeah.
So, yeah, for anyone who, like me, has never heard of that, what is that and why did you decide to do it? I'm curious if it dovetails in with your own personal recovery from this concussion or if it's completely separate, but I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, so Vipassana, it is a type of meditation. It was developed in India, and the basic principle of it is that it's silent meditation. And so when you take a course in Vipassana, you go to a center and it's 10 days, and for 9 of those 10 days, you don't talk to anyone. Right? So it's totally silent. You don't make eye contact, right? So like the whole thing is you're in your own experience. There's other meditators around you in the course, obviously, but you don't acknowledge their presence effectively. And so for 12 hours a day, you sit in silent meditation. And the first 3.5 days, you practice what's called Anapana meditation, which is literally just sitting and noticing your breath in your nostrils. So you're not thinking about your breathing anywhere else in your body. You're noticing your breath as it comes in through your nostrils and as it goes out through your nostrils. And so the goal is to really feel that sensation, that light sensation of the air on your nostrils. You literally do that for 12 hours a day for 3.5 days.
Wow.
And then, yeah. And of course, you're doing a lot of other things too, because what comes up is like you realize the monkey mind that you have, like you're all these thoughts come in and feelings come in and like, oh, my back hurts because I've been sitting here for 10 hours already, and you do get up. Like there's like micro breaks like every hour to 2 hours where you have 10 minutes so you can go pee and stretch a little bit and come back, and then you have like a breakfast and you have a lunch and the food is amazing. They feed you really well. But effectively you're meditating all day. You start at 4 a.m. and I think you go to bed at like 10 or something. And so after day 3.5, then you start actual Vipassana. And so what Vipassana is about is noticing sensations in your body. And you've just spent 3.5 days learning to quiet your mind and focus on the sensation of the breath of air in your nostrils. And so then you start working on feeling the sensation in the top of your head, in different parts of your head and face, and all of your body parts, basically. Like you start going from your head to your toe, all the way down your body, and you're just noticing sensations. And, over this time, you learn that like sensations will change. right? And there's what we like to call like good sensations, like pleasant, nice feeling sensations, like tingling or warmth. And then like the unpleasant sensations like pain or tightness or like even nausea, which happened to me once when I was there, these sensations. And, the big lesson that I took at least out of it, and that a lot of people do, is that all of these things that pass through your body are just sensations, right? And they will pass through. Like
Mm.
they are ephemeral, like they will change. And, this is something that I actually learned in expedition and in bike pack racing long before I did Vipassana, because like how we feel during a bike pack race or an expedition, it's like riding the waves, right? Like sometimes we feel amazing, sometimes we feel terrible. And like when we feel terrible, we just know like this will also change, like just keep moving forward. And when we're on a high and we feel great, and we know like take advantage of this now, like push a little harder because this will also change, right? So
Yeah.
like I learned that as an athlete, but it's a very different experience to do it when you're just sitting in silence.
Yeah.
You don't have that distraction of like riding your bike or, the nature or the trail. Like you're just fucking sitting. And so, you feel these sensations throughout your body, head to toe. And eventually, when you get good at it, like you literally feel yourself as pure electricity. And that is really cool.
What does that feel like? Can you describe that?
Yeah, so it's basically like buzzing, vibrating. Like for me, it felt like being plugged into a wall, like plugged into an
Uh-huh.
outlet. And all of a
Yeah.
sudden, my whole body's like, and it's this like very pleasant, like buzzy, vibrational feeling. And, they call it like melding of mind and body, right? So like everything just melds together and you just experience yourself as energy, as electricity. And, then there's like the mind, right? Like I could observe myself feeling this, there's the me that's like, oh, wow, this just happened. I feel like I was just plugged into a wall. And now my entire body is just feeling like one big vibration, So there's the me that's experiencing that and the me that's watching me experience that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. So, so it was a really cool experience and like having it like, I mean, I didn't ever think I would sit 12 hours a day.
Uh,
But it was cool. And by the end, it was easy to do. It's like now I'll meditate for an hour and it's like, that's super easy. Like I have no problem just sitting for an hour, even 2 hours, after you've done it for 12. And so then,
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say the last day you start talking to people, to kind of like try to reintegrate. And it's so weird. But you're curious, because there's all these people sitting next to you,
So
for
you haven't
9 days
talked to you the whole
meditating.
time.
Who are you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've
And
been
you have
looking at
these,
you out of the corner of my eye, but I'm not allowed to look at you.
yeah,
Who
yeah, yeah,
are
yeah.
you?
Totally. Well, and that's, the first couple days is that, and then by the end, it's like you're just in your own experience. But yeah, and you have your own little living quarters. And so you're sleeping. It's just like a very austere, like tiny bed and a shower. And the room is like, I don't know, 6 by 6 or something. And yeah, it was really cool. It was definitely, I would say, one of the most important things I've ever done in my life. And,
Wow.
the reason I did it, I told you earlier that I was supposed to, this was January 2024, I was supposed to go race Tour Te Waipanamu in New Zealand. And so I had this like 2 week time like blocked off to go do this race. It was actually like I was going to be there. I think I was going to be there for a month because Esther was down there and I was going to spend some time with her. But so I had this time blocked off where I wasn't going to be doing my other work because I was going to be devoted to this race for 2 weeks, like in the backcountry. And so I had the time, right? And so I have a friend who had done Vipassana before and had talked to me about it over the years. And he's like, oh, you should do it if you ever can sit still long enough, like just make that time in your life to do it. And like you would really love it. And, when I had to finally admit that like I was not healthy enough to go to New Zealand to race, if you're one of those athletes that like ignores your like pushes through, ignores the symptoms, or doesn't understand that the symptoms are what they are, like eventually your body will stop you, right? And that's what happened to me at the end of 2023. And so when it became very obvious that, despite all of the hoping and the trying, I was not going to be healthy enough to go to New Zealand, I was like, well, I think I'm healthy enough to go sit for 12 hours a day for 10 days. And so,
Yeah, that's
so
perfect for concussion recovery.
yeah, and it really is. And one of the most important things about concussion recovery, especially in the early days, but also for those that have persistent symptoms, is like nervous system regulation is so important. Like we need to be able to make our nervous systems jump up into sympathetic mode for exercise, and then we need to be able to bring them back into parasympathetic mode, right? And especially in a world where like everybody's stressed out, the world's on fire, like all of these things are happening. Like that's hard on anybody, right? But when you have a concussion and you're trying to recover from that, it's even more important to do these like supportive nervous system practices, because the rehab isn't going to work if your brain is on fire, if your nervous
Yeah.
system is like off the charts, like heightened and aroused, right? So like in order for like vestibular rehab or visual rehab or neck rehab to work, you've got to get your autonomic nervous system working well first. And so meditation is a really good way to do that.
Did you enjoy the experience like in real time? Because to me, and I think most people, it sounds like an extreme thing to do, to go 10 days without talking, without any, really any inputs. You're not looking at your phone, you're not talking to people. Did you enjoy it, or did it take a little while to like really get into the experience before it became, I don't know if you ever got to where you enjoyed it?
I loved it, actually. I loved it the entire time. Like,
really?
Yeah, like the way that I felt. So, when you register, you go to the registration, and when you get there, you go to the registration, you give them your name, you drop your phone into a Ziploc bag, and you hand it to a person, and they lock it in a closet. And the way that I felt when I walked out of that room after doing that was like nothing I'd ever felt. I felt 700 pounds lighter.
Yeah.
I was just like, oh, this is going to be good. And so, from that moment, I just loved every bit of it. And I'm an introvert. Like, I don't need to talk to people.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, great, 10 days without speaking to anybody. That's awesome. Like 10 days of quiet. That is awesome. Like, I love quiet. Like, I'm not somebody that puts on a TV or music in the background. Like, so, I like music, but like, I love quiet, and I've always been that way.
Yeah.
And, so like, it's part of, I'm sure, what you love about bikepacking, and what I love too, is like just being by yourself, being in the quiet. Like, it's, so I loved the whole thing. And it was just so interesting to like feel my body in that environment, like sitting, like it's not something I've never done for that amount of time.
I don't think many people have.
No. And it was curious, like I'm a very curious person. So I was just very interested from a curiosity perspective. And I really love the entire thing. I'm planning to do another one. I don't know that I'll be able to do one like this year, but I'm going to actually try to do one like this summer at some point in Washington. So
that was one of the things I was curious to ask you. Are the benefits from doing it something that like lasts for a long time, or is it something like you feel like you need to do occasionally to get the positive benefits of doing it?
I mean, it depends like how much you kind of integrate it into yourself and your life afterwards. Like, the reason I want to do it again is because I truly actually enjoyed the experience. But, so when you come home, like for me, at least, I can't speak for everybody, but like the lessons that I learned during it have definitely integrated. And I think in part because I already had learned them in some part through my athletic pursuits, about like changes is going to happen. And like another big thing with Vipassana is like, they talk about, so there's a teacher, right? You're not just sitting in silence all the time. Like, there's a teacher that will teach a lesson, and then you sit in silence, right? And then there's a lesson in the evening, right? And so they talk about like avoiding cravings and aversions. And like, those are the things that cause suffering, right? So if you're craving something and you're really craving it and you want it and you want it, and then you don't get it, that causes suffering. And if you have an aversion to something, like you hate this thing and you don't want it and you don't want it, and then it happens, this causes suffering, right? And so what Vipassana aims to teach is equanimity in knowing that everything changes. So if you have this thing, or you're having this experience that's like really amazing, like relish it and love it, but don't cling to it, because it's going to change. Like, it's going to change, right? And if you're having an experience that's like painful and hard, like absorb what you can from it and feel the feelings. Like if it's grief or anger or whatever, like be in that, but don't push that away so much, because that's going to change too, right? Like, it's all just part of the experience that is life, and it's all going to change. And so, I did have that part of me before because of bikepacking and racing in particular, but like being able to learn it in a way where I was experiencing it in my body without the distraction of movement, that was different. And so I do feel like that has stuck with me throughout this concussion journey when there's a lot of these things that I can't change,
Yeah.
like I'm trying, I'm still trying, but like, I'm not attached to it anymore. Like if I can never race again, like that's okay. I'll be fine. Like I'm not
Yeah.
attached to like, I have to be able to do this again, and I'm also not attached to, I'll never do this again. Right. It's just like, I don't know. And like that Vipassana experience definitely has helped me kind of come to that place. And then, I have kept up with meditation. Like I meditate at least 30 minutes a day at one time, and I meditate a lot throughout my day. So part of my current concussion journey is a lot of fatigue when I'm in my work days. And so, as you can imagine, like being a PT, especially in the concussion world, is very like energy intensive. And like I use a lot of brain, right? My brain works really hard. And in Tucson, I do see some in-person clients. And so, I'm driving around Tucson or I'm on Zoom with a client, and I get really fatigued after maybe like 2 to 3 hours of that. And so I take what I call a brain break, and I put on a blackout mask and I meditate for usually some 10 to 20 minutes, right? As long as I have, right? Sometimes that's 30 minutes. Usually it's 10 to 15. And I can drop in so fast now, because I had that experience and I didn't get away from the practice of it. And so when I go to meditate for 10 minutes, I drop in really quickly and I can experience my body as electricity, and I can focus on different parts of my body and check in with myself and feel the sensations. And this is also a really good, like a cool tool to have in the athlete world, right? Like focusing on the body and checking in and being like, okay, my shoulder, my arm, like, how does this feel? And I notice how it feels. Okay, my chest, how does this feel? My back, how does this feel? It's just like checking in with your body, feeling the sensations. And so I can drop in really quickly. So, I meditate for 10 to 15 minutes, like probably 3, 4, maybe even 5 times throughout the day. And then 30 to 60 minutes always in the evening, like after my work day, before I go for a run or a bike ride. And so, if you keep up with it and, they recommend like you meditate 2 hours a day, like an hour in the morning, an hour at night, like I don't have time for that shit, right? I wish I did, but most people don't. And so for me, like it's been enough to do it in like small little increments, just consistently, that like that aspect of it, like being that it's so that it's called interoception, right? Like being able to sense what's going on inside of your body. I think that's a really useful tool. And that's definitely something that I can do way, way easier now since Vipassana. And so, if you just like go to a course and then you practice that in little increments, like you're not going to lose it, and so, and if you stop meditating, stop practicing, then it's harder to tap in. And so then you might need to go do another course. But, I haven't. So I want to do another course because I really like the experience. Like 10 days of not talking, like amazing.
You just don't want people to bother you for 10 days.
Yeah.
It's like going to the bathroom for 10 days if you have kids,
Right?
That's where parents go to hide. Yeah.
And then, there is something magical about just the sitting, right? Like I can go on a 10-day bikepacking trip by myself, which I had plenty of times, and it's different. It's the distraction of movement or the distraction of nature, and those things are great. But like there is something special about literally just sitting and having nothing to distract you from your own body. And, having that practice of like being able to control your mind, like not letting your mind run away with you, bringing it back to focusing on the sensations in your body. Like that is very valuable in my opinion.
Yeah. It sounds amazing. I don't know how to find 10 days. It sounds interesting and scary, to be honest, to be alone with your thoughts for 10 days like that. That sounds intense, like I would want to go into it in a pretty good headspace. I would want to. It's like if you were doing ayahuasca. I've never done ayahuasca, but I feel like you'd want to go in a good headspace before you commit to something like that. Either that or you're going to be faced with a lot of unpleasantness, but maybe that's a good thing too.
Yeah, I mean, you got to face it some way or another, or maybe you don't have to. I think a lot of people just don't, but I feel
they just
like
go ride their bike and run away from it.
Yeah, totally. And that's a strategy until it's not,
Yeah.
So.
Well, I wanted to give you a chance to plug your physical therapy business too. We haven't had a chance to talk about that very much, but you're also a physical therapist, as we've talked about. So give us an idea of like who you think needs physical therapy and what type of clients you work with, and maybe just plug what you do on the physical therapy side a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, so the concussion work is physical therapy, or that's part of it, right? But
Yeah,
like,
that's something I picked up on when we talked, and I thought was
mhm.
interesting is that is
Yeah,
also physical therapy.
it
Yeah.
is. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, in the general, musculoskeletal physical therapy. So I work with mostly outdoor athletes, mountain bikers, kayakers, rock climbers, runners, hikers, people that love to recreate in the outdoors. And my approach is very integrative and it's very performance based. And so like I'm not the PT that's going to tell you like, oh, okay, you're a bike packer with knee pain, like you need to stop riding your bike for 2 months or whatever. You need to stop exercising, you need to stop doing what you love, right? Like we're going to look at your alignment and we're going to look at like where you've got imbalances in your muscles and where you've got like alignment issues in your body that can be corrected with retraining. And so we're going to retrain those things and at the same time do some things that are also going to enhance your performance. So it's a rehabilitation and performance combo. And, typically, I'll see people, sometimes I'll do just one-off consultations, if someone's like, hey, I just started having trouble with my shoulder. I'm going to, I've got a month. I'm going to go on this big pack rafting trip to Alaska. Can you do an evaluation? Give me some ideas for exercise. I'm like, okay, then we'll do that. Right. But a lot of it, it's, a month or more of progressive rehabilitation and performance training. And I will keep people doing their thing as long as I possibly can. Right. And there's a lot that you can fix with alignment and with motor control, which is so strength is our muscle's ability to produce a force or to do work. And motor control is our brain's ability to tell our body how to move and to tell a muscle how and when to fire. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so a lot of issues that endurance athletes have because of the repetitiveness of our sports, whether that's running or biking or whatever, or kayaking, is the alignment issues, the lack of motor control, the overuse injuries. A lot of us most of us, all of us, I think, are plenty strong, but we need to be able to use that strength in the right movement patterns so that we're not training ourselves into dysfunction.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
training
if you're
it properly.
Exactly. So, for example, if you're riding your bike and you're making a billion rotations on your bike and your knee is tracking to the inside, I don't know if you can see my hands, but if your knee is like tracking to the inside just a little bit, if you're riding for an hour or two, you might not have a problem. If you're riding for a lot of hours, that's going to cause problems over time, right? So like I do a movement assessment, and this is all virtual. I do it over Zoom. I do a movement assessment and I pick apart people's movements, right? So I deconstruct more dynamic, complex movements, and I look at the pieces and I say, okay, what is going wrong here? Like, what is causing this issue? And I always find something, right? So like I deconstruct the movement, and then in the rehab, we reconstruct the movement piece by piece. So we look at one piece, we correct that, right? And so maybe that's going to be some really targeted strength exercises in a certain alignment, right? Because you're strong, you're just strong in the wrong movement patterns potentially, right? So we correct the movement pattern. We work on muscle activation training. So how do you actually activate? So the glutes, right? The glutes are super important in cycling. And that's a huge way to alleviate knee problems because so many cyclists are quad dependent and even hamstring dependent. We don't use our glutes enough, right? And so that causes undue strain on the knees. If we can learn how to use our glutes, we can use that to help keep our knees in better alignment when we're riding. We can also use it to take the pressure off the quads. That makes the quads not pull as hard on the knees. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's a lot of that, like picking apart the movement patterns in these complex and dynamic movements, seeing what the cause is, like at the very baseline, what is going wrong to create this dysfunctional movement pattern, and then correcting that pattern and then building back up gradually so that when you're doing your dynamic or complex movement again, now you can do it with proper alignment and good motor control, and you can actually train yourself into greater function rather than training into dysfunction.
So I was going to ask you, you mentioned doing it online. How much of this can be done online and not being needing to be there, like in the real world?
Pretty much all of it. Yeah, pretty much all of it. I've been doing online PT since 2013, over 10 years,
12
like
years.
before COVID. Yeah. And, the way that I kind of started that was I was doing performance coaching online and PT in person. And like, I can't, even when I'm coaching, I can't not be a PT. Like, that is how my brain works, right? I have this knowledge, I have to use it. And so for my coaching clients, the first thing I do, and I still do this, first thing I do for everybody I do performance coaching with is I take them through a movement evaluation, and I do that over video. And so I watch the way they move.
Is this only for cycling?
No, I do. No, outdoor athletes, anybody. I've worked with a lot of kayakers and pack rafters, rock climbers, runners, like all outdoor athletes. I mean,
so how are you diagnosing the movements of a kayaker?
So you basically, you don't necessarily have to watch them do their thing. Like you watch them do movements that mimic their thing.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. And so you can, and there's even movements that don't mimic their thing, but they're movements that they have to do when they're doing their thing. Right. So you can tell a lot by literally just watching a person do a two-legged squat, watching someone do a single-legged squat, watching somebody reach up for something, watching somebody move their arms. Like you watch them from the front, back, you watch how their shoulder moves, you watch how their scapula moves, you watch how their rib cage and their thoracic spine move, you watch how their neck moves, you look at their posture, right? Like you don't have to actually watch them doing their thing in order to diagnose what's going on when they're doing their thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I was having my performance clients go through a movement assessment online, and I was picking out things that like could potentially cause injury as they started training. And so when I would write them their training plan, which would include, the endurance piece, whether that's like running, biking, climbing, or whatever, or kayaking, it would include the endurance piece, and then it would include a strength piece, and then would also include a corrective exercise piece. Right. So like before you just go out and start strength training, like sport specific strength training, you need to correct your alignment first. And so we'll do that rehabilitative corrective exercise plan in the beginning. People need to do that for anywhere from like 1 to 4 weeks. It depends on the person. Sometimes it's a very fast issue to correct. Like sometimes people have been having pain for years and the issue is so quick that it's like they correct it in a week once they actually know what it is. Right. Sometimes it's fast. And then, once they have the basics down, I call them foundations of movement medicine, right? So like there's these basic foundational components that I teach to literally everyone that I ever work with. And once they get that down, and, that can take a couple days to a week, depending on how much they practice, then we start incorporating the strength training and the endurance stuff. And they use those foundational movement principles in their strength training and in their endurance activities. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's all online. Like the only thing that I can't do online is manual work, but manual work is rarely necessary, right? Like that's another one of those passive modalities that people tend to rely on too much instead of active intervention. And there are some times that it is necessary, right? So like if you just had a rotator cuff repair, right? So a major shoulder surgery, right? You need passive range of motion. Like I can't do that online. Like literally people that have rotator cuff surgery, you can't move your own arm for the first like 6 weeks. And so for something like that, I would tell them you need to go see an in-person therapist for this amount of time. If you want to continue with them, great. If you want to see me after that, like once you're able to do your own movements, like then let's talk, right? So that kind of thing you can't do virtual. Sometimes I will refer like my concussion people where I will refer them is when they need manual work on their neck. And that is pretty common after a concussion. And so I will refer them to either a really good manual physical therapist, or I'll refer them to a really good chiropractor that also does like active release technique. So like soft tissue, joint mobilization, sometimes joint manipulation. Manual work on the neck is sometimes necessary with concussion. And so if during my concussion assessment, I deem that they do need that, then I will refer for that. But I don't even touch that until we've looked at autonomics, until we've looked at exercise tolerance, until we've looked at nervous system regulation. Like there's no reason to even touch the neck until those basics are in place. And so usually I've seen the person like between 2 and 4 times before I will decide like, okay, like we can do all of this virtually, or I want you to go see, and usually I'll have someone specific. I want you to go see this specific practitioner to get some manual work done in your neck.
Are you one of the more like accomplished or experienced and robust coaches that is available to adventure athletes? Because I mean, if just listening to you talk, I mean, you have a wealth of knowledge, but you also have 13 years as a professional athlete, so you know what it's like and what it takes to be a professional athlete. Then you have your physical therapy side, so the brain body connection, and you have the experience and you specialize in the concussion side of things as well. And so it seems like, yeah, I mean, I'm going to give you a chance to brag, but it seems like you're a very experienced coach with a lot of areas of expertise to offer clients.
Yeah, I mean, I feel weird like tooting my own horn, but I like to think
I'm making you. It's my fault.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I do have a lot of expertise and a lot of experience, and I'm a doctor. Like I know about these things. And so yeah, I like to think I'm good at my job.
Are most of your clients like athletes that use you for coaching service and then you use your auxiliary experience in other fields, or do you get specific clients for like all areas of your expertise?
Yeah, it's kind of half and half.
Just depends on what the people need.
Yeah, exactly. And there's quite a bit of crossover, it's like I will get, so like I was training an athlete to run her first like trail marathon. This was last year. And she started out just as a coaching athlete, performance athlete. And then she started, as most people do in their first like time really doing like any ultra distance type stuff, she started having some pain. And so then we deal with that on the therapy side, right? And so we did a lot of gait training. So I'll have people like video themselves running on a treadmill from the front, side, and back. And then I'll do a gait analysis. And this is kind of a standalone service that I offer. So I don't do gait analysis on like every runner that I coach right away. But if they start having any issues that I didn't pick up on the movement screen, if I didn't pick it up on the movement screen, then they start having it during training, I will say, okay, I need to see you actually running. And I will do this with a bike too. Like if someone's on the trainer, I'll have them video themselves riding from the side, front, and back. And I'll say, okay, I actually need to see you doing this. So they'll video themselves, send me the video, and this is what happened with this athlete. And so then we ended up doing a pretty intensive like gait training session and like completely restructuring her running gait. And so, those are the type of clients that start as performance coaching and then end up weaving in some PT and then move back into performance coaching. And then I get a lot of PT clients that I work with, like they come to me for an injury, but they're athletes. And so they want to continue doing their thing. And so like I do, what I call performance physical therapy, right? Like we're doing the PT, but we're also weaving in the other pieces as well. So they're not just focused on rehab. They're also working towards continuing to be fit, continuing to be strong. And then, some of them go their own way after they're done healing from their injury, and some of them continue on with me for performance. So it's kind of all across the board.
Do you have any people like me that are 45 and I've been telling people recently the only way that I can tell that I'm getting older is that I get injured more frequently and it takes longer to recover. So I feel like I just need a fucking physical therapist on call all the time because I'm always getting injured, and I'm always like, I mean, what I've read, and please correct me, but like, it's just check my ego at the door. Like I go to the gym 3 or 4 days a week, and it's like start with, 10 or 20 pound weights, but instead of where I used to be able to do 40 or 50, right? It's like just start way, way, way down and like build up. But I guess my question is, am I normal? Is what my body, because I'm new to being 45 and I'm new to like getting injured all the time. Is this just the new normal for being an aging person, human?
Yeah, not necessarily. A lot of it does go back to what I was talking about before with alignment and motor control, right? And as we get older, it's harder for us to ignore that kind of thing, right? It's also harder for us to ignore mobility, right? Like, when we're in our 20s and sometimes even our 30s, like we can get away with doing a lot of things with like piss poor alignment and terrible mobility and not a lot of stability, right? And then at some point it bites us in the ass. And whether that's getting older or whether that's getting a major injury, like that will come back to haunt you during one of those times, right? And so, when we're over 40, and I include myself in 42, right? So like you do have to take more time for recovery. You do have to take a little more time to warm up. You do have to take a little more time to like, you got to, spend more time with like stretching and mobility and stuff after you ride or run or lift or whatever, like that stuff. Well, I say it, quote unquote, becomes more important, but it really doesn't. Like you should be doing that all along.
Right. You're
Right.
just not paying the consequences early on.
Paying the consequences. Right. Exactly. And so if you're lucky and you don't get a major injury early on and you don't have to learn how to like retrain your movement patterns, then you're going to have to learn it when you get a little bit older. Right. Like a lot of people, I mean, me, like, obviously I'm a PT, so I learned it when I was 23, but you know, like I was able to stay out of injury for like, I never got injured, you know, after I learned all the stuff that I know. And my only injuries have been big traumatic ones. Like I had one pretty traumatic bike crash in 2013 where I broke my pelvis and dislocated my shoulder and had to have surgery. And you know, like that's something that like, yeah, could have been avoided if I would have done things differently. But like I had that injury and then I had the major concussion in 2020. And I've really not had any other injuries aside from those. And so, you know, like I definitely feel like my knowledge of the body and my knowledge of alignment and how to move has kept me out of that. And that's something that you can learn at any age, right? And so, you know, if you or like anybody in like the 40 and up demographic, like I work with a lot of people that are in their 60s. And even, I mean, I have one client right now that's 70 and she's a crusher athlete. And like, she's still out doing her thing. You know, she's been sidelined by a concussion, but she'll get better and she's going to keep doing her thing, you know, and like it takes a little bit more maintenance, but you certainly aren't like doomed to a life of like, now I'm going to get injured all the time. And now I'm going to be in pain all the time. Like, no, you just have to like take care of your body and, you know, like move the right way.
Yeah. I think I should, I might be your next client because I think I have, I need to learn how to be a middle-aged man. And I think I still think that I'm a kid, and I'm teaching myself over and over again that I'm not a kid anymore, which is really frustrating. I'm not ready for that, but I really might hit you up because I have just ongoing lingering things that come up all the time. And it's frustrating. Like, I think that's one, I've said it before on the podcast, but that's one of the most frustrating things as an athlete or just like an active person that wants to be outside using their body, being injured, having a concussion, you know, not being able to do the thing that you know you can do, like you're physically and mentally capable, but you have an injury that's sidelining you. To me, that is one of the most frustrating scenarios to be in. And so, yeah, we need people like you, and it's probably a pretty cool job to be able to like help people find healthier versions of themselves, right? Like, that's gotta feel good. In the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just make people feel good all the time. They come to you feeling bad and then they leave you feeling better.
Well, sometimes they feel worse before they feel better. I mean, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
It can be hard, right? But yeah, it's very satisfying. And so your concussion was 2 years ago. Was that a bike crash?
No. I fell out of a bunk bed.
Oh, shit. Oh, man.
End of story. Yeah. I was hoping that wouldn't come up. But yeah, I was at an unfamiliar place. I had to go pee in the middle of the night. I might have been drinking the night before. And like, I went to get out of this bunk bed and like, I missed this step. Like there was a step I was supposed to step on. And like, I just like I caught myself with my head. And I measured it, and I think it was like a 6 foot fall or something. I don't remember, but I measured it, and really, I'm lucky to be. I hit it hard and was kind of fortunate that it wasn't worse. But yeah, and mine healed up pretty well. I did take it really easy. I don't remember if I took the 4 to 6 weeks, but I remember taking it very cautiously. Like it was. There was just this feeling that I had in my body that like everything was saying protect my brain. Like it was like this uncontrollable feeling that I was really noticing and paying attention to, that my body was telling me to take it easy and telling me how important it was that I don't hit my brain again. Like I just kind of knew this stuff intuitively. Yeah, and that's good. That made it easier to take it easy, I guess. Like, I went on like the day after it happened, I went on a short hike because it was actually my birthday.
Oh no.
So it happened the day after my birthday, and then I had this birthday trip planned, and we were going to go hiking and biking and stuff. And so I wound up, going on like a 2-mile hike. And I think I went on like a few mile ride. Like I tried the ride and I was like, okay, no, this isn't what I should be doing. Like I could ride, but all my senses were telling me like I shouldn't. And I just like listened to my body. I think I made a full recovery. I hope so.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I mean, if you're not having any symptoms, that's great. And so how did you know, like when, you said your body was telling you like, protect my brain, like, how did you know when to shift that and get back into your regular stuff?
I just listened to my body.
Okay, good. That's awesome.
Yeah. I did it very slowly. I was very, it was easy for me to like care because it's your brain and you only get one. And I wasn't the stupid, ego driven, whatever, where I'm just like, I'm going to tough this one out. I knew that this one wasn't an injury to tough out, right? Like I knew that I wanted to heal correctly. I wanted to heal slowly. And so I don't remember 4 to 6 weeks exactly what I did, but I mean, something in there sounds right before I was back to like full physical activity. Like I just took it really slow and gave myself rest and allowed myself to recover and was really aware of the fact that I didn't want to cause more damage and injury than I already had potentially. So,
right. So you kind of had you gave yourself a good balance of like rest and exercise and didn't push it, but didn't like just lock yourself in a dark room and made sure you couldn't hit your head again. Yeah. I mean, you did it the right way. And honestly, like you kind of defy like the two categories that we say of like people that get post-concussion, syndrome or persistent concussion symptoms. Like you had that good balance. Like usually people with persistent symptoms do it wrong, right? So we either have like what we call the avoiders or we have the pushers, right? Yeah. And the avoiders are the ones that just continue to say like, oh, I need to just protect myself. I need to rest. I need to, recover and just do passive things and not be active and not exercise, right? And then that causes persistent symptoms. And then we have the pushers, right? That's what I was. So like, I got to get back to training right away. I got to keep doing my intervals on the trainer and push, and then crash, right? So like the avoidant people like never push at all. And then they are just stuck in that like symptom cycle. And the pushers push, and then they crash and not like literally crash, but like they have a health crash, like their body stops them. Right. And so there's those two categories and you are not either of those categories. And so that is probably why you were able to make a full recovery intuitively on your own without having persistent symptoms.
I think I should give some credit to my girlfriend here. She works in an ER and she's way smarter and does all the research. And I was definitely the benefactor of her Googling everything. And she has, friends that work that are doctors and everything, right? So like, I think I got some good advice early on. Yeah. If I was left up to my own devices, I probably wouldn't have been. So I do have to give her some credit for probably steering me in the right direction with that. And I did get lucky. And I feel grateful to have made a recovery and also like listening to your story. And then also Rebecca Rush came out with her whole podcast about concussions and TBI and stuff. And that experience scared the shit out of me for hitting my head again. Like that was that was scary, and it was a wake up call to how like easily you can get injured doing something stupid like falling out of a bed. I do way more gnarly stuff than that in my real world and have just been lucky. But it made me really aware of like, hey, I don't want to do that again. And I'm going to be a little bit more cautious about that to whatever degree I can. It just, it really woke me up for sure. I feel like I kind of got away with one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you did.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Well, Dr. Eliza Sampey, thank you for coming on the podcast. 3 hours to 5 minutes. That's pretty good. We had a lot to talk about. And honestly, like we could talk for probably days more, but I
know I have a lot of questions I would ask you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. It was entertaining and educational. And hopefully we gave some people some good information about what to do if they injure their head, and some good resources and stuff. And again, why don't you just remind people, like, if they want to hire you for a coach or for your physical therapy work, like, where can people find you on the internet?
My website, elizasampey.com, or my Instagram at Eliza Sampey. Those are probably the easiest places to find me. So thanks so much for having me. This was fun.
Thank you. Yeah, you've been someone I've been wanting to have on the podcast for like many years. So I don't know what took me so long, but I'm glad we did it. It was a blast.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Bye. Enjoy your day. Thank you.
Yeah, you too. Have a good one. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.